Welcome back to another episode of Northwoods Whitetails Podcast. I'm your host, Joey Davis. I'm sitting here with co-host Brent Dragon, and today's guest is Nick Fortin. Nick, how are you?
Good, man.
Good. Give me a little bit about who you are, where you grew up, your passion for whitetails.
Sure. So I grew up in Derby, Vermont, so I'm a kingdom boy. I'm now a deer and moose biologist for Vermont Fish and Wildlife, so I've been doing that for going on 10 years this year, so it's a long tenure for a deer biologist, but I've been with the department a while, and yeah, like you said, I'm an avid deer hunter, grew up hunting in the kingdom my whole life, so...
You grew up in a deer hunting family.
Yeah, it's what I love to do, and getting to work with it all the time is, awesome.
Yeah. Did you know you wanted to do this when you were in school, high school?
I wanted to definitely be a wildlife biologist. I mean, that was always sort of the goal. But, once you start getting into wildlife biology and you see what kind of the more social, political side of especially deer, I wanted nothing to do with deer early in my career. Deer management. I mean, I loved it. I was interested in it. I loved the science side of it, but the managing people side of it, which I'm sure we'll talk about a whole lot more, that scared me when I was early in my career. Like I didn't want to deal with people, right?
Yeah.
And people, different opinions and having strong opinions, and I wanted nothing to do with that. So I actually did not want to do deer biologist. I wanted to be the moose biologist. That was always my goal, right? I was like, because I grew up in Essex County, during the peak of our moose population. So I was always like, yeah, I'd love to manage moose. That'd be the coolest thing ever. And that sort of fell to me after I became the deer biologist.
Yeah. You love to pick antlers. You grew up with it.
Yeah. I mean, you grow up, in the early 2000s and hunt mostly Essex County. Like, you're going to do something with moose because there were a lot of moose and not many deer at the time.
Yeah. So after school, where did you go? Where'd you attend college? How did you?
So after high school, I went to Paul Smith's College first in the Adirondacks for a couple of years. I was, as anyone who knows me growing up, I was a shy kid. The thought of going to a big school scared me, intimidated me, right? So I went to a small school in the Adirondacks for a couple of years, quickly realized that they didn't really have the full wildlife program I wanted. I transferred to the University of Maine, so I got my bachelor's degree from the University of Maine in wildlife ecology. Then I worked seasonal gigs, wildlife jobs, summer job here, work a month or two here for 5 years. Worked for Vermont Fish and Wildlife for a lot of that, but I worked on a lynx project in Maine. Went out to Wyoming for a couple of years doing moose and mule deer habitat assessments. I literally get paid to hike around western Wyoming for 2 years.
Nice.
That's freaking awesome.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I did a lot of really fun stuff, and then eventually went back to grad school, got my master's degree from University of New Hampshire.
Very cool.
And then actually helped New Hampshire start their moose research project right after finishing grad school, or kind of as I was finishing grad school, they were starting that project. So I kind of helped them get started on that. And then went out to Washington and Idaho. I was a bighorn sheep biologist for a couple of years before coming back to this deer biologist job. Yeah.
That's nice.
It was all cool stuff, and stuff I wish I could have done a little longer. Not forever, but I wish I could have spent a little more time in almost all of those places.
Yeah. Sounds like you've got a wide variety that you have completed.
Yeah, it was awesome while you can do it, right? And while you're young and you can afford to make no money and travel all over the place and all that stuff works. Yep.
It was great. Huh. Yeah, I think one of the first times that you and I met, I think that actually the first time that I met you, I was picking antlers, and you were trying to locate a cow via GPS.
Telemetry.
And you had told me that you figured she had given birth.
Yeah.
Right? And you figured a black bear, a Bruin, had probably gotten her calf.
I think we had a couple that we weren't sure, and you never know that stuff. Right. Yeah. You go in with those collared moose, you can see, because we're supposed to get a point every 12 hours or 13 hours from from those collars. And if they're in thick cover, you like any GPS, right? Sometimes it won't get a signal. So you don't actually get one every 12 or 13 hours, but they're moving around and then suddenly they localize and you get like 5 or 6 points that are right on top of each other. 2-3 days it's spent in the same spot. And you're like, okay, that thing gave birth. Like, this is the middle of May. It should be giving birth. Okay, it gave birth. And then we try to go walk in and see if it actually has a calf, if was it a stillborn, whatever. And sometimes you get in there and there's no calf. And you don't always know what happened, right? You don't know if that thing was dead basically when it hit the ground or, did a bear get it?
Yeah.
Sometimes you go in there, you see bear sign, you're like, probably a bear. Yeah. But we'll never know unless you've found the carcass.
Right. Most of the time, those bears will probably drag them off or
Yeah. And all we can locate is the cow.
Yeah.
And if she's not right, the carcass isn't going to be right with her. Sometimes we did a few times. I never did, but some of the other guys did find like stillborns essentially, and the cow was still right there, and you can find the birth site, and there's a dead calf there, but probably born dead.
Yeah.
But it's.
I think that particular day, you were pretty convinced that it probably had relations to do with the big bruin or whatever, because you figured she was there for 3 days, if I remember right. And she had dropped it, and then I think it was the next day she was like 3 miles away.
Oh yeah.
And you were like, there ain't no newborn calf walking 3 miles.
Yeah.
You figure that.
And we would see that too, right? Like and you remember this better than I do. But of course, there were a whole lot that get mixed together, right? But we would see that too. Is right. They localized and then they take off, and you're like, well, we know this calf can't keep up with her going 5 miles or 3 miles, whatever it is. So.
Yeah,
probably still, or it lost it. How it loses it, you don't know.
Yeah,
like a bear is certainly.
I remember it because it was very educational to me. You had mentioned, and I believe you had mentioned to me that a bear is the only predator that can tell when a cow moose is going to drop her calf.
I mean, bears are very smart predators, right? And like, if they learn that, if they figure that out, like, hey, this moose is acting funky if I wait, or, I mean, they can also smell it.
Yeah.
Like, their nose is incredible. So, but coyotes aren't a threat to a calf anyway, because the cow is just going to stomp it.
Yeah.
Right. A bear is really the only thing that really ever kills a moose.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, they're incredible predators.
Yeah.
They're good at it.
They sure are. How did that study go? That moose study?
I mean, we learned a ton, which is what the whole point of it was, right? Like, we had a lot of different focuses. The main one was, of course, what is the impact of winter ticks on those moose and on our moose, and we learned that it was a little more substantial than we had thought it was originally. I mean, we lost, on average, over 3 years, we lost 50% of our calves in the winter to winter ticks. So we learned that. We also learned, the impact beyond just the direct killing of calves. We learned the sort of secondary impact, which is what I was doing, when I met you, is in tracking the cows. You see, all right, what's our birth rate? What's the survival of those newborn calves? Because if, winter ticks don't usually kill an adult moose, but they're pretty debilitating in late winter, which is also late gestation. Mm-hmm. So that calf is born underweight, because the cow wasn't in good shape. She was dealing with ticks. And so you get smaller calves that don't survive as well. With moose, interestingly, and you don't really see this with like deer or anything, but an undersized moose calf will die because it actually can't reach the udder of the cow, because the cow moose udder is pretty high off the ground, right? So if that calf is born too small, it can die because it literally can't reach the udder to nurse.
No kidding.
So, you need healthy cows to produce big enough calves. And then there's also the later thing. The bigger they are, the bigger they're going to be in the fall, the better they're going to withstand ticks that following winter.
Right.
Right. So it's all
a cycle.
Yep.
Yep. Huh.
Interesting.
Yeah. No, it is. I never thought about it in that equation.
It's
being able to reach.
It affects a lot beyond just the direct killing of calves. Obviously, that's the immediate impact. But your overall health of your moose population is just less, and then that they struggle to deal with all the other things that wild animals have to deal with.
That was what, 2016?
We started that in 2017. We captured in January of 17, 18, and 19.
Yep.
And then we actually still had collars on the air this past January. We turned them off then because we had like 4 or 5 still working, and we're paying, I don't know how much per collar, but it wasn't worth it for 4 or 5 collars that we knew were they probably would have died by now.
Yeah.
They were expected to last 7 years. We were, I think, at 8 years as of this January. So they were well past their expected life. And
that's pretty incredible.
But still, we have 8 years of data on some of these cows. It's cool.
Was there any bulls left with collars, or?
There was one still working as of January, but there are at least 3 others as of a year prior that we knew were alive. One was still working. 2 people had trail cam photos of that. The collar had died, but they're still out there wearing a collar. So there's probably still 4 bulls out there with a collar on that
is not receptive.
The collar doesn't work. It's just jewelry at this point. But but they're identifiable, right? If those moose die somewhere, someone finds them or a hunter shoots them, then at that point we'll have data to say, hey, we know exactly how old this moose is because those bulls were all collared as calves. So we know exactly how old they are. You can get a sense of how they were doing, what kind of shape are they in. I know some of the ones that were, at least one of the ones that was still working, he was 6 or 7 years old. So it was a couple years ago when I got the photos of him, but not a super impressive bull.
No.
Like, he should be in his prime, right? And you'd probably call him a 3 or 4 year old. If you just saw a picture, you'd be like, oh, that's a younger bull. He's still got some growth, but he was 6 years old.
Really?
So he was probably one who, barely survived as a calf.
Yep.
And then
put him behind.
They sometimes never recover from that.
Yeah.
No matter how much food they have the rest of their life, they sometimes never recover from that kind of early life trauma, setback. Kind of like people, if you're sick as a kid, sometimes that stunts your ultimate growth.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
How many collars did you have on the whole?
Ooh,
do you remember?
136, I think.
136?
Was the total, or 126?
All in the Northeast?
All in, Essex County, or
Essex?
WMUE.
Yep, okay.
Yep. So that's really the only place we have issues with ticks. Like, winter ticks exist everywhere. And like I tell people, like a moose in southern Vermont almost certainly has winter ticks on it. It might have a couple thousand winter ticks on it. So like if they find it dead or it gets hit by a car, and they're going to be like, oh, there's tons of ticks on this thing. But a couple thousand winter ticks is nothing for a moose. Yeah, it's the tens of thousands that we get up here where we have higher moose densities. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Right. And a couple thousand is a lot of ticks, and anyone's going to look at that moose and be like, this thing's crawling with ticks, but it's not the same as what we see.
It's not the same as when you find a mortality of a calf on the ground up here. The animal is dead and it looks like it's still moving.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's absolutely incredible how many ticks are on that.
That's the part moose. That people, unless you see a lot of these moose, like you said, late winter, April, and understand how many ticks they actually have on them, you really can't fathom that.
Yeah.
And make that comparison.
Where did these winter ticks come from?
So winter ticks have actually always been here.
Really?
As far as we know, as long as we've had moose in Vermont, we've had winter ticks. So what has changed is climate, for one. Our winters are shorter, right? And the density of our moose. So, I mean, we have winter ticks documented in Vermont in the 80s on moose. And in fact, I think we have a record of a moose that very likely died from winter ticks in the 1990, 1991. So like they were killing the occasional moose decades ago.
Yeah.
It's the regular, every single year we have a ton of ticks bit that is new in the past decade and a half, 2 decades. And that's because, 1, our winters are shorter than they used to be, and 2, we've sustained this high moose density now for decades, which is not normal for moose. If you look across North America, our estimate here in Essex County is about 1.5 moose per square mile, which, for those of us in northern New England, they're like, well, we used to have more. There's more in parts of Maine and New Hampshire. It's not high. But if you look across North America, it's pushing top 10% of all moose range in North America, the 1 moose per square mile. So it's a high density moose population, and we've had it continuously for many decades. And that's I don't want to say not natural, but it sort of is. Like it only exists because of all the commercial timberland in northern New England, and we've created this exceptional moose habitat that sustains high numbers of moose for a long period of time. A parasite figured out how to take advantage of that.
Yeah.
And so that's what we have.
When you find these winter ticks, I mean, you'll find some of them, let's say in the Skidoo Trail, moose beds down, right? They look like giant blueberries. They look frozen. They look dead. You take them back, you put them on the tailgate in the sun, you put them on the dashboard of the truck, let the defrost hit them, and all of a sudden they come right back to life.
Yeah.
A lot of these things, is it true that they'll be dormant up to a year without?
So winter ticks really interesting, like, and people always mix up winter ticks with all the other species of tick, like blacklight, and they're entirely different, right? But winter ticks incredibly resilient, like you said. Like, I mean, so some of the moose that we had collared, the calves, when they would die, we would actually cut the hide off that calf, throw it in a freezer, and then at a later date count all the ticks that were on it. That's how we figure out there's 30 to 50,000 ticks on a moose, right? So some poor grad students had to actually go and count that stuff. But to your point, that you throw that hide in a trash bag in the freezer for a couple months, take it out, throw it on the table, and some of the ticks start crawling around. They've been in a freezer for whatever, 2-3 months. Like, that didn't kill them.
Wow.
But they can't, apparently, they can't actually like overwinter unless they're on a moose. So they won't survive a winter by themselves unless they're on a moose. But like dropping off on snow, not necessarily going to kill them, right? Probably what kills them is that some bird comes along and eats them if they're sitting on top of the snow.
Yeah.
That's not going to kill them. If they fall on bare ground and get under it and we get a couple of days of freezing temperatures and they're in the leaf litter, that's probably not going to kill them. They're pretty hardy, it turns out.
Yeah.
So, like, yes, long winters matter, right? Gives them less time to find a moose in the fall. They're more likely to drop on snow, which does reduce their survival, and it reduces like their egg. So like one of those ticks will lay like thousands of eggs, right? If that tick has been frozen a couple times, maybe only a couple dozen of those actually turn into anything. So that can have an influence, right? So it does matter, but falling on snow is not going to guarantee you no ticks.
Will a lot of these ticks, if they don't find a host, will they burrow into the ground before snow comes?
No, they will basically keep trying to find a host, and if they don't, they die.
Huh.
So that's like they have to find something to complete their life cycle. And, you know, the other thing, the reason moose are such, well, not the problem, but why they thrive where there are a lot of moose is like this tick, if a deer walks by, like they don't care what walks by, right? They're sitting on vegetation with their arms up waiting for something to walk by. If it's a deer, they'll grab onto a deer. But deer groom themselves all the time. So over the course of the 5 months that tick has to be on an animal through the winter, a deer is going to knock most of them off because they're constantly grooming. But moose don't groom, right? So moose picks up all these ticks, and it doesn't even know it has ticks on it until way late in the winter.
I find that very interesting. It's a different kind of tick, but we'll often shoot deer in certain places, and the only place that there's generally ticks on a deer is behind its ears.
Yeah.
Right? And I witnessed this one day. I think I was hunting Ohio or whatever. A doe came in and she started cleaning up her fawn. And this, I'd only had put 2 and 2 together because I'd killed a deer previously that was loaded behind the ears. And she's sitting there nudging away at this fawn's ear. And I was like, she's freaking picking ticks is what she's going to sit there and groom one
They groom the fawns. And like, I mean, deer are incredible groomers. Like I remember my former advisor from grad school, and he did a bunch of deer research. They did a bunch of deer research at UNH before I was there. I mean, I did a deer project, but they used to have like captive deer and do all sorts of cool studies on that. But he was telling one where they're actually taking deer out, like doing feeding studies, like what a deer like to eat, and they'd actually basically have a deer on a leash, like watch what it ate, right? But he's saying how he's out watching these deer and watched like a deer fly land on this deer's nose, right? And obviously that's annoying. And that deer, like with its hind leg, kick that deer fly out, like hit it without hitting its own nose. Just clean that deer fly off. And you're like, yeah, I'd like to see a moose try to do that, right?
Yeah.
Like, deer are incredible at getting pests off because they evolved with that sort of stuff. And so they're,
And moose just can't.
like, and that's where like winter ticks will exist even when you don't have moose, because like a handful will get through on the back of the ears of a deer or whatever, but not tens of thousands. Every moose you get in these tens of thousands, and that just ramps up numbers so fast.
Yeah.
That
They just can't withstand it.
yeah.
So there's nothing you can do. Like I was just thinking, and maybe this, I'm sure it's been brought to your attention before, but like a block, you know, where the moose are yarding. Can you put a block in there of feed that would kill the? I mean,
So there's all kinds of ways you can treat ticks. I mean, people do it. Have been doing it on livestock forever. Like ivermectin is a common treatment for ticks in livestock. But the problem with a block, something like that, is one, moose are not good at coming to bait. Like, I don't know what flavor you'd put on something to get a moose to actually, I mean, salt maybe, right? But like only certain times a year. But you also can't control the dose when something's eating it. So some moose are going to get enough where it'll kill everything, but some will only get a partial dose, and ticks can develop immunity.
Oh.
So if you partial dose things, then you just make a bunch of immune ticks.
Okay.
So you don't want to go down that road.
Yeah.
There are injections. You can capture moose and give them injections. Quebec actually, again, all of us in the Northeast are dealing with the same issue. So Quebec has been studying ticks and moose for a couple of years, and they were actually, some of the moose they were capturing, they were treating them for ticks when they captured them. So they gave them an ingestible, the same thing you give your pet. I think it was Florilaner, which is like one of the common tick things you give your dog, but a big oversized one. And then there's like a pour-on, and I don't remember what the chemical is, but you can do it for, again, livestock. Like you buy it, it's like
Frontline.
Permethrin.
it's not, it might be permethrin actually, but it's a pour-on version, and I think like it's labeled as like for goats or something, like, but they were doing that and the ingestible, essentially trying to kill all the ticks that were on the moose when they captured it. And it did, for the most part, work. Like pretty much all the moose they treated survived, and they were fine. They had no hair loss. Like it worked. But you have to capture every moose every January. And like, if we had $1 billion, could we do that? Sure. But we don't have $1 billion. Like, it's incredibly expensive. So it's not a practical like way to manage it. And I think the really important part of that is it doesn't address the problem, right? The cause of this is high moose abundance. And while we all like seeing a lot of moose, that's what's driving your ticks. And you can knock ticks back, but unless you keep this up forever, they're eventually going to come back because you have the moose. So like, that's what we're dealing with right now. As long as we have high numbers of moose, we're going to have a lot of winter ticks.
So it has nothing to do with the amount of sulfur or anything that's in the bodies of these animals.
It's no. Ticks are just a parasite taking advantage of a relatively abundant host.
No kidding.
Yeah.
So bringing that, your goal is to bring the population down per square mile to what, 0.75?
Target, well, about 1 right now is our target. And I will say, like, that's a loose target. Like, so there's a lot of research out there on winter ticks and moose. Like, I mean, there are studies in Canada dating back to like the 70s. Like, this has been studied for a long time. It's been extensively studied in the Northeast over the last decade. And like I said, we have places, we can look at southern New England where we don't see moose dying of winter ticks. They have some, but they don't die of it. And we can pretty much determine that somewhere around 1 moose per square mile is where you stop seeing any impact from winter ticks. Like, they still exist, but you're not seeing moose dying from it. And so that's why that's our target, is about 1. We're still a little above that, seem to be headed toward it. But I would say we're already, I think, seeing some positive signs, like even not being that low. So we may not have to get to 1. Like, we might be kind of okay where we're at. The hope is kind of that it falls apart, like the cycle falls apart at some point, which is historically what winter ticks were. Like, if you look back, there are records of winter ticks from the late 1800s. Moose die-offs from winter ticks in the Midwest from the late 1800s. So this has been around forever, right? But it was always like 1 year or maybe 2 years in a row, you had this like surge of winter ticks, caused a bunch of moose to die, and then you didn't see it again for 6 or 7 or 8 years, or maybe 10 years. Then you'd see another little die-off. We somehow reached this point in the mid-2000s, like I said, and probably because we had such high moose densities in the early 2000s.
What was
where
that?
it just became chronic.
Yeah.
Like it's every year now instead of periodic.
What was the square mileage?
So
or moose,
in
sorry,
Vermont, I think we peaked around 5 moose per square mile in the early 2000s. So, we're a third of what we used to have. So yes, there are a lot fewer moose than there used to be. And that probably having that number, and like, New Hampshire and Maine had the same thing at the time, and parts of Maine have still continued to keep high numbers, but something about that allowed the winter ticks to just every year to be at high numbers instead of like spiking and then falling off. And if we could get back to that, if we saw a winter tick die off once every 10 years, like, yeah, it's not great, but it's not going to drive our moose population. Mm-hmm. And that'd be awesome if we could get back to that and have healthy moose for the period in between,
Yeah. It definitely would be nice to see them a little bit more in certain areas, but like we're not seeing them. And I don't know if it's habitat loss or what, but we're not seeing them like we used to at all. It seems like they can't rebound more in the central part of the state.
Oh, yeah. I think there's parts of Vermont. Once you get out of, really outside of Essex County, you just don't see moose numbers. And I don't know that we're going to until we see some large-scale habitat change. Like moose need a lot of regenerating young forest habitat. That's all they eat, and they're big. They need a ton of that food. And we have so little logging that happens in most of Vermont that we're just not going to see.
It seems
we're not going to see more moose than we have now, I don't think. Because
and it's just getting harder and harder for these places to be logged.
Yeah. There are more and more forces trying to not log everything that, like, we struggle on state land, but like anywhere, most of Vermont is private land. And yeah, you might get some logging here and a little bit there, but like, we need like landscape level change. Like the percentage of young forest, if you think about the whole landscape, it's in southern Vermont, like far southern Vermont, it doesn't even register. Like it's 0% when they go out and measure how much young forest is out there. Like, yes, there's a pocket here and a pocket there, but it's so little that it doesn't even like move the needle. And ideally, if we want any meaningful number of moose, you'd probably want to be up at least 4 or 5%. That's thousands and thousands of acres that would need to be cut every single year. And that's not going to happen. Right. And central Vermont is only slightly better. And again, you're not going to get that level of cutting. So like, it's not probably, unfortunately, going to get much better than it is across most of Vermont. And that's why we don't hunt moose in most of Vermont, because there just aren't that many. But until the habitat changes, I don't see that changing.
Yeah. I see it, right? There's plenty of winter habitat on a lot of these 3,000 footers.
Yeah.
And I say that, well, why aren't these moose coming back? Well, it's that mid elevation where there's no regeneration that's allowing them to populate.
Right. You got thousands of acres of mature hardwood forest, which is nice to walk through, but there's not much for moose to eat in there.
Yeah.
Right. So, same issue we have with deer.
Yeah. You guys get a lot of data from the moose that are killed. Is there any correlation how these ticks were affecting them then, say in that 2017 timeframe until 2024, with weights or antler diameters or any of that like there is with deer?
Yeah, it's not as clear cut as some of the stuff is with deer, but yeah, we're seeing improvement in our health. It's subtle at this point, not massive improvement. We definitely have more room to go, but body weights for sure have come up. We had a kind of a weird fluke thing last year where we had a bunch of really tiny yearlings, but otherwise, body weights have been considerably higher the last 3-4 years than, actually body weights are getting close to like 1990s, early 2000s level, which is essentially peak. Birth rates haven't quite come up to where we'd like to see, but they're, maybe 10% better than they were a decade ago.
It seems like
So-
some of these cows are starting to have twins again.
Yeah, we see occasional twins. We're seeing pretty much every adult cow is breeding every year. Like, so we look at it's actually the data we get from ovaries when we make hunters bring the ovaries in, but essentially we can tell how many calves that cow is going to have the following spring, right? And in an ideal moose herd, really healthy moose herd, you want to see like 1.2 as your average rate. So like 20% of your cows have twins, essentially. We're at 1 right now. So some have twins, but some have none.
Yeah.
Right. But so we're right at 1. We were at 0.9 for a lot of years, 0.9. Now we're at 1. So we're a little better than we were.
Progressing.
We still would like to see a little improvement. I don't know if we're ever going to get back to 1.2 because, like I said, we're never going to totally get rid of winter ticks. We're going to have other issues, but like we're making progress, I think.
Yeah.
I don't want to say I'm not going to claim victory yet, right? We're not out of the woods, but we seem to be moving in the right direction.
It seems like the forest is moving in the right direction with you as well. Forest practices.
And that's helped us. Like, so there was, Essex County, because it's such kind of a little microcosm of the big, timber company, Northwoods sort of thing. Like, you basically have one major landowner in Weyerhaeuser. There's some other timber company land, but Weyerhaeuser's the big one. But like you're talking an area that was hammered in the 80s and 90s, tons of habitat, and then largely wasn't cut for 15 years. And that really hurt us, I think. Both we had this burgeoning moose population, then you stopped making habitat for them. So it focused them on the few areas that were good habitat and really concentrated them. And then once Weyerhaeuser started cutting again, I mean, it was Plum Creek first, and then, they were bought by Weyerhaeuser, and they started cutting more heavily again. And now we've created good habitat broadly across the region, and so we've spread our moose out more. And I think that has helped us as much as anything, right? Like we can have the same number of moose in Essex County, but if they're all focused on 4 pockets of really good habitat, then those places have really high moose densities, and that's going to create problems. But if you take that same number of moose and spread them evenly across the landscape, it reduces your density locally, and that reduces potentially ticks.
Gives those
right,
calves
and
more of a
it
chance.
also creates the you don't see as many moose because they're more evenly distributed around the landscape. So you can go find a pocket of moose and it might have 3 moose in it instead of 10 moose in it, but there's more pockets of those small numbers of moose, and so that's where I think the management has helped us for sure.
Yeah. And if we could get some of that down, central southern parts of
if
the
you
state,
could have
you'd see the same thing.
Commercial logging on this scale in other parts of the state, we definitely would have more moose and more deer in those areas just because you have the feed for them.
Yeah, and I think that's why you're seeing it, H1, for an example, around the Worcester or Groton area, that moose population has sustained itself or even coming back some because of all the regeneration.
Yeah, and we do see pockets like that. And that's the other part we run into in Vermont, and this is getting into the weeds a little, but we manage at this wildlife management unit scale, and that's the way we can manage here. But H is a perfect example. H has the Worcester Range on one side and Groton on the other, which are decent moose habitat, and then a whole lot of not great moose habitat in between. And so we're estimating for this whole place, and it's not a good reflection of either one of them. Right, we're probably underestimating moose numbers in Worcester and Groton, and overestimating in between, and it's not a great way to manage moose. But that's what we're dealing with in most of our management units. Is the moose are so pocketed, and we have a lot of the unit that doesn't really have much moose habitat or isn't ever going to have a lot of moose. So it's a challenge both to estimate how many moose are there, and how do you appropriately manage that? Finding the right balance. So it gets complicated.
How do you go about figuring out how many moose are on the landscape? Is it hunter surveys? Is it?
Yeah, so we mostly based on hunter surveys on a year-to-year basis. So we have our moose population model, for lack of a better term, is based on the sighting rate of moose by deer hunters which comes from our deer hunter survey, like moose seen per hour, basically. But that sighting rate has been related to actual moose densities from aerial surveys. So you figure out how many moose are actually out there from an aerial survey. And this was originally done in New Hampshire, and then we did a few years of aerial surveys in Vermont to fine-tune it for us. But then, you say, okay, at these moose densities, blah, 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 you get this sighting rate of moose. But, of course, as you know, with sighting rates of anything, they vary a lot year to year. So we have to use a rolling 3-year average to kind of smooth that out. And then we struggled for a while with our hunter survey not getting enough people to return a survey. And this is a issue we've had with hunter surveys always, right? It's like, I don't know why people don't do it, but we've struggled, right? We were sending out 10,000 surveys and getting 900 back. And we're sending them to hunters. So it's not like, they're just choosing not to tell us what they saw and how many. So it's frustrating.
Yeah, it makes it tough.
But we've gone electronic in the last few years. We've more than doubled our number of survey returns. So we've gotten better data in the last few years. But I guess what I'd say to your point there in how this applies to other parts of Vermont. So that methodology was developed in northern New Hampshire and then basically WMUE. So higher density moose populations, pretty even distribution of both moose and deer hunters. How that translates to a part central or southern Vermont where H or one of our mountain units where the moose are all at higher elevation in November and your deer hunters are all at lower elevation, you probably don't get the same relationship, right? And you're talking a lower density of moose than we ever fit our model to. So it's probably reliable for like trend, like is the population increasing, decreasing, or stable? But am I going to tell you that whatever estimate we come up with of moose per square mile is right in those areas? No, I don't think it is.
Yeah. Do you guys see yourself, and maybe you already have done this, with a thermal drone? Has the department thought about buying a thermal drone at all?
I wouldn't say we've looked into it extensively at this point, but we're a tiny department with a limited budget, so and that stuff is expensive to use. But New Hampshire is looking at that. They have a research project that should be wrapping up pretty soon, I think, using thermal drones as a way to try to estimate moose density. And the same thing, like we did aerial surveys with manned aircraft in the past, and now you have the capability of doing that with a drone, right?
Yeah.
It's a little less expensive, but also drones have limited range, and there's regulations around how you can use them. And I think the biggest shortcoming, and a lot of people kind of fail to understand this with any aerial survey, even thermal aerial surveys, is infrared can't see through trees, and especially softwood trees. So if a moose is bedded under a clump of fir trees, you're not going to see it, even with an infrared. So it's not perfect, right? You can work around that, but it's still not a perfect estimate. But I think it's probably somewhere we're going in the future. The other thing that we're looking at, we're probably headed in the future, is use of like trail cameras. There's 1 million trail cameras out on the landscape, and you can use like the rate at which you pick up pictures as an index of how many moose or whatever other species are out there. So there's other options we're probably going to be shifting toward as we go forward.
I think it's only a matter of time, I think, with today's technology that the use of a thermal drone will help you in the long term. It seems like my neighbor just lost his beagle for 24 days, right? Through the month of February, the coldest, snowiest time we had all winter. He hired a guy from southern New Hampshire, come up with his, $30,000 drone or whatever it may be. And he said the amount of deer that he saw with that drone could see all yarded up was incredible. He said they actually even saw where there was a bear den.
Oh yeah, you can see incredible stuff. And I mean, they're almost more interesting than they are scientifically useful. Like just to show people like how much stuff is actually out there, right? But yeah, no, you're right. It's a fantastic tool, and I think we'll absolutely be using it. It is just, there are more limits on it than what people think. Like they think, oh yeah, you just hire this company with drone, they fly and they see everything. And it's not that, but like
a little more complex.
It's cool. The technology there is awesome, and I think it's cool to just look at the footage and, like you said, see things you didn't know were there and how many are there.
Yeah, get a population estimate.
Yep.
So what will take place after this year? Will you reevaluate how many moose permits?
Yeah, I mean, we reevaluate every year. Like I said, best we can tell now, we're still a little ahead of, above our target of 1 moose per square mile, but we seem to be headed toward it, which has been our goal for 3-4 years now. So we do seem to be reducing numbers. We proposed 180 permits again this year. That'll be the 3rd year in a row of that allocation. I mean, the allocation only means so much. Ultimately, it matters how many we kill. And of course, we've had some tough years the last couple of years.
Warm,
last year
shitty
was
conditions.
terrible. Yeah, it was hot and dry for most of the season, so our kill was way less than expected. But the cow kill wasn't that far off, so it still ended up okay. But point is, less impact than we might have thought we would have had. We'll see how this year goes. My guess is that we'll be close enough to target after this coming fall that we'll be looking at reducing numbers.
Yeah.
And frankly, I also think and 180 is a lot of permits to pack into E. Like crowding is an issue, is a legitimate issue.
There's some guys stepping on toes.
Well, and it also like at this point we're like, okay, we need to kill more moose than we are. Throwing more people out there is probably not going to do it because all the spots are taken. Right?
I cringe when moose permits come out. Right, like I've got these woods to myself for the most part, and the second moose permits come out, there's
a camera on every other tree.
Cameras everywhere. There's more damn cell cameras, and you get better cell service up here than
that has changed a lot
in
the last
Norton
few
and
years.
Averill than I do in Stowe, Vermont. Right, like
yeah, no, that's changed a lot, and that's there's other issues there, but that we're maybe going to be looking into.
Yeah.
But
I hope you do.
Yeah. Well, I know, cameras are one of those things. Cell cameras are one of those with moose particularly. I think we're going to have to look into, but yeah, we're not there yet. But no, I think permit wise, probably I would like to be able to have fewer permits. It is too crowded. I mean, we recognize that as managers, like it's not a great hunting experience for people when you're like, okay, go find a spot scouting, and then, oh yeah, but by the way, you got to get there at 2 a.m. if you want to beat everyone. you know, like that's not good.
Yeah.
And so if we can, if we're not quite to our goal, at least cut back a little and just like try to ease into it with fewer permits, would just be a better experience.
Do you ever see maybe moving those seasons a little bit closer to the rut, or what is like the explanation behind that per se?
So that's come up, like a lot of people bring that up. So honestly, I don't know why our season is when it is, but closer to the rut would obviously kill more bulls, but that's not controlling populations. That's just making hunters happier and fine. We can't kill cows any earlier if we want to get that ovulation rate data that we get from them, because it has to be after they've conceived.
Okay.
So we don't want to kill cows any earlier, and no one does. Like New Hampshire season's the same time as ours, and Maine doesn't start killing cows until, I think now they start ours, but their main cow season is actually the week after our season. So we want to kill the cows either the week we're hunting now or later. So that's a big part of that. And frankly, because it's such a small season, and you're really talking like me and 2 other of our staff that work on moose, having 2 separate weeks is just logistically not possible for us at this point, right? Like we're already working straight for, archery season, and then our regular season is a lot for 180 hunters.
Yeah.
So 1 week, we have proposed to extend it to 9 days.
Is that purely based on like weather related, or? Yeah,
that's all about like we've experienced the last 2 years where you get a 6-day season and 5 days of it suck. It affects your kill. But if you had, 3 or 4 days at the end that were better, including a weekend, you'd probably get closer to what we expected.
And that's been the case the last couple of years. Right. The beginning part of the moose hunt for 2, 3, 4 days has been really warm.
Yeah.
And then it seems like, we've either got rain or snow the tail end of the hunt.
Yeah.
And that seems to be.
Yeah. Last year, the last day of the season last year theoretically seemed like it was good weather, but hunters were burned out after 5 days of crap, and it's Thursday. If you had Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, which was decent weather, that would have gotten our kill up closer to what we expected. So, it doesn't affect the total number killed because we control that by permits, but it just gives hunters more flexibility and it keeps it more consistent year to year.
Yep.
So that's why we propose that. It's just one, it makes more. Why are we ending a season on a Thursday? That's just weird.
Right.
But,
right. Everybody's got Friday off. Let's just.
Yeah, you took the whole week off.
Yeah.
Why don't we let you hunt the whole week? Right.
Yeah. So. The other proposal to let some of the hunt of a lifetime kids to hunt during the rut, I think is awesome.
Yeah, and that one was from a petition from the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Conservation Group, but also Hunt of a Lifetime.
Yeah.
And so they now actually can choose to hunt our archery season. They have that ability already, but they'd have to use archery equipment, which, as you probably know, like a lot of these people can't use.
It's tough.
That's logistically not reasonable to expect them to use archery equipment, right?
Yeah.
So, why not let 3 people hunt with a gun at that time? It's not going to change anything, and it's going to give them a better experience.
Yeah, you're giving them a hunt of a lifetime. You really are, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if they can...
Especially, again, back to the crowding thing, instead of them having to fight with 150 other hunters for a spot, now they don't have the level of competition. Like, they can find a spot to themselves. They might at least see a moose or hear one, to have a better experience.
To have that interaction with a bull, being able to call it in, it'd be a very special thing. For a lot of
Even if
kids.
they didn't get a moose, but if they could see a bull doing all coming in and grunting and thrashing stuff, and that'd be awesome for them. So
gets us all going.
We felt like we have no way we could argue against that. Like, it's not going to affect the harvest anyways. Three hunters.
Yep, it's a good thing.
Give them,
Yeah, great thing.
It's a good thing. All right, so deer. Been getting a few emails, Nick.
Yeah, a lot of emails. I made a lot of friends in the last month.
Somebody's got to do it.
Hey, I get bored and want to rile people up. No, it's probably, again, like I said earlier, like my least favorite part of being deer biologist is, well, frankly, you're not managing deer, you're managing people, right? And everyone has opinions on how things should go, and most of them are very valid opinions. Like, that's what they want. That's their interest. Okay, cool. But the next guy has the exact opposite ideas. It is literally impossible to make everybody happy.
You attend these meetings and you see it, you hear it.
Yeah.
Nothing gets accomplished because there's just so many mixed emotions in these things.
Well, and you get frustrated, and I understand why people get mad and they feel like we're not listening to them. Like, they say, no one ever listens. We say these things all the time, and no one ever listens. We can't do everything everyone suggests, because literally we'll get a comment from one person that says, like, whatever, you need to stop killing does. There aren't enough deer. And then literally the next person will be, I see so many deer, I wish we could kill more does. Well, I can't make both of those people happy.
Yeah.
Right? But obviously, my job also is to focus more on the science side of it, and that's where our Fish and Wildlife Board comes in and the public opinion side. But like, it's impossible to make everyone happy. So we do what we feel is best for our deer herd, and we try to give hunters, to the extent we can, like, the best overall experience. Like, make the most hunters as happy as possible.
Your best interest is in the resource.
Ultimately, long term, right? Like, if we have a sustainable deer population, and maybe you're not going to see as many deer as you want, but you'll continue to see deer for a long time, as opposed to seeing a whole lot for a few years and then having no deer population for a decade and a half or more. So, we're thinking long term, and if we have a healthy deer population, then you're going to have the best we can do.
Yeah. A couple of those proposals, I don't have them right in front of me. I've heard them a million times, but obviously the biggest thing that we're up against is lack of habitat and too many doe on the landscape.
Yeah, that's the big one for us, is just it's balancing the number of deer we have with what our habitat can support. And kind of like we touched on with the moose, like, there is a lot of Vermont that is just not good deer habitat. And people argue with us about that all the time, about how, my area can definitely support more deer. I mean, without being an asshole, it's hard to be like, well, no, it can't. Right? Like, the reality is it can't. And it's hard because we don't have a lot of deer in Vermont, in most of Vermont. There are a few exceptions, like Champlain Islands, where we have 40 deer per square mile. But like our hunters travel. A lot of our hunters travel to other states. And if you go south or west of Vermont, you find 40 deer per square mile pretty regularly. You come back to Vermont and you're talking like 10 to 15 in most of the state, which is not a lot of deer. But if your habitat can only support 8 deer per square mile and you have 10, that's too many deer, and you're not going to have healthy deer. And over time, you're going to run into issues, right? You're going to see your deer numbers decline eventually. It affects a whole suite of other species. It affects the health of our forests. There are a lot of reasons why we just need to keep our deer in balance with the habitat we have. Ideally, we'd like to be managing habitat too, like make the habitat better. But again, like I said, it's all private land. We have very little control over that. The only thing we have authority to manage is the deer, and so we have to do what we can with the deer.
And so, a lot of folks are clear when you say habitat, you're talking winter habitat.
It's winter habitat it depends where you are in Vermont. It's winter habitat and really it's forest habitat. So like, anywhere we have farm fields or suburbs, yards, we have plenty of deer. It's often not where people want to hunt. But places where, big blocks of forest, it's the quality of that forest habitat. And in the mountains in the Northeast Kingdom, it's winter habitat is your limiting factor.
Yeah. A deer's got plenty of habitat for the most part. In this country, the six months out of the year, right?
Here, Essex County's the sort of unique part of Vermont where summer habitat's phenomenal because of all the logging, but winter completely controls the number of deer. I mean, we did issue some doe permits last year, but otherwise, we haven't really killed does here in any meaningful numbers in 20 years, and it's still by far our lowest deer density part of the state. That's winter kills them for us.
You don't come here to deer hunt, right?
No, you come here to hunt big bucks, and that's
yeah.
Yeah.
Some of these doe problem areas, like A and B, you can't give enough permits to kill enough doe. I mean, you can't access the land. How are you going to manage, or what's your goal in that situation?
I mean, we have to do, again, this is where we get into the issue of like, there are some intractable problems. Access is one. Like hunters cannot manage deer they don't have access to. But we as a state agency still have a responsibility to manage all of the deer in that unit. And so we have to, this is why we need other tools, right? This is why we need to be able to fill our antlerless permits in rifle season, because we don't have enough muzzleloader hunters to issue more permits in those zones. I can throw out 10,000 permits in B, but I'm only going to sell 4,000. That's what sells every year, 4,000. That's not enough because that's how many muzzleloader hunters there are, right? We need more hunters to be able to take those permits. Yes, there's going to be the issue of like there's still big farms that no one has access to and you can't kill those deer. And so all the hunters end up concentrating on the few accessible places. Then they don't see any deer there because they've pushed them all off. It's a huge issue. But it comes back to like we have few, if any, tools to address that. So I don't know what the solution is, but again, we have to try to do something. We can't sit back and be like, well, we give up. Like people posted too much land. We can't manage them. We have to try to do something, but we do fully recognize that like that's a huge issue. And it's not only for managing deer, but also for like the experience hunters have, like trying to hunt in those areas. Like you can't get permission where there are deer. Where you can find a place to hunt, at least in the fall, there aren't deer because they've been pushed off. They get too much pressure and they move over to the neighbor's property, which is posted. So it affects the hunting experience. It affects our ability to manage deer. It's a huge problem, but
what are you going to do?
What can we do about it? We can't force people to not post their land. Hunters sort of have to take the responsibility, I guess, of asking. Yeah. Trying to get permission. I know there's places that are not going to give you permission.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of farms in that country, big farms, and a lot of those people still hunt. They want it to themselves.
That's a big part of it. And like, hunters, at least, the ones that complain to us or bring this issue up to us, they're real quick to point to like, oh, out-of-staters moving here who don't like hunting or whatever. When we've actually looked into why people post their land, the most common reason, and I'm not saying this is most land is posted because of this, but the most common reason that people post their land is because they are a hunter and they don't want other hunters on it. So it's sort of self-inflicted wound here by the hunting community at large.
100%.
Like, yeah.
So what do you do, right? Like, maybe you can shed a little light on this because I don't know enough about it to say so, but when you have a lot of these farms in that part of the state, which are very key proponent to what Vermont is, and we need them, but a lot of their land is in land use. Can they technically post their land if it's in land use? Can they keep people off of it?
Yes. So our current land use or current use law, technically called the Use Value Appraisal Program, but there's nothing about posting in it. And there's nothing about access for recreation in the program. The program exists to maintain open working land, like keep it from being developed. Has nothing to do with recreational access for hunting or anything else. Other states do have that component to it, right? Like I think New Hampshire has like a tiered system where, you know, if you post your land, if you're in the program, you get less of a tax reduction than if you don't post your land. I know that's come up before in Vermont, but then, you know, that comes back to, well, who's going to enforce that?
Yeah, that's
right. Like that's a tax department program. You think the tax department's going to go out there and like check whether people are legally posting their land or not?
Yeah, definitely not.
So like in theory, that's great, but I don't know that it's actually going to solve the problem. And this isn't unique to Vermont either. Like any state, again, to our south or west, like you guys hunt in other states, all private land, you don't hunt on it without permission.
You don't step foot on it without permission.
So, like, our hunters have to sort of, it's unfortunate. Like, the whole open land thing in New England is a wonderful thing, but it's changed. And I think we have to accept in the future, like, if you want to hunt private land, you got to gain permission. And it's part of hunting. And it's, I have no interest in that. Like, that is enough to deter me from hunting in an area. And I get why a lot of people don't, but man, we need hunters willing to go knock on doors and find a way to hunt in those places.
Yeah, it makes it tough. You know, you're starting to see leased land come into some of these areas.
Yep.
The almighty dollar is speaking up.
Yeah, and again, like as a landowner, I sort of get that. I mean, leasing land is illegal, for lack of a better term, not allowed under current use. If you're in current use, you can't lease your land. But again, like who's checking these things? Like, And yeah, if some group of hunters is going to pay a landowner's taxes for exclusive hunting rights on property, I understand from a landowner's perspective why you want that. My hope would be that those hunters are responsible deer managers and kill enough does. Unfortunately,
most of them are not, right?
No,
most of them have
they want to see as many deer as possible. They think more does means more bucks, which is absolutely not true. And
all of them want to shoot a great big buck.
Yep.
We're guilty of it, right? I mean, how many doe do we shoot compared to how many bucks we shoot? Not nearly enough. We let the neighbors do it. You know what I mean?
And a lot of hunters, like, you know, especially, it's sort of an interesting conundrum of sorts. Is you're more successful hunters, and some of these are folks who hunt multiple states like you guys, but even some who only hunt Vermont. Well, less now because we have a 1 buck limit, but like, if you can hunt a couple states and shoot 2 or 3 bucks in a year, that's all the deer you need. Mm-hmm. Where are you going to go? What's your incentive to shoot a doe other than feeling like you need to as like a good deer manager? Mm-hmm. I think we lose some of that in our good hunters because they're able to get enough deer just hunting bucks, and that's what they want to do. If I could do it, if I was good enough or had the time, I would just buck hunt and put 2 or 3 in the freezer and good. That's all I need.
It is tough, and it's not meant for everybody, right? Everybody doesn't have the heart to shoot that deer, and I would guess, I'm not saying anything about my hunting ability, but that was me this fall. You know, I had to go to work, so I ended up hunting one afternoon down my way, and it was the one time that I wish I had a doe permit in my pocket. You know, I'd seen 14 deer that day, and I was like, holy shit, we got a problem here, right? Like, you know, very few fawns in there, a bunch of mature does. You know, I could pick them out pretty easy, which one I wanted to shoot and which one I didn't. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I need to start putting in for for a doe permit. Like, this is getting a little out of control.
Yeah, and I think that's why we're trying to look into things like, can we expand our venison donation program, like options to get our more successful hunters to just to make yourself feel like you're doing your deer management duty. Fill a doe tag, maybe give it away. Yeah. Find a neighbor that'll take it if you don't need the meat, whatever. But like, we kind of need people to step up to the table there and be like, or step up to the plate and do your duty as a deer hunter. Help manage the deer
I did
population.
it last year over in New York, because over in New York, where we have some land, there's so many deer and the guy that owns the land has no idea that's what I told him. I said, all I'm going to do is go bow hunting and shoot some doe, and I did. Yeah, and we gave those deer away, but hopefully it makes the herd better for sure.
It's tough too, because you have soft-hearted individuals out there, right? Like myself, I won't shoot a doe that's got fawns.
Well, I get that. Like I as a biologist, and we have to do this sort of hard stuff every now and then. I'm a little less sympathetic, but like I had a big doe last year with twins, and it was a long shot with a muzzleloader, so I didn't take it, but I had an open standing broadside shot at 115 yards, and I was like, I'm not willing to wound her to take any chance. Like, if I had a clean shot closer, there was also another doe there, so like the fawns are fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wasn't going to take like some crap shot at a doe with fawns, and I have shot a doe with fawns before.
Oh, I've done it.
And sometimes it's not a pleasant experience. Sometimes it's fine.
Yeah.
But I absolutely understand why people don't want to do that, and that is a lot of the challenge too, right? Like, a lot of hunters willing to shoot a doe, but I want that single lone big doe.
That's me.
And it's hard to find that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I got no problem shoot. I'll shoot a 1.5-year-old doe before I go shoot a big doe.
Well, the flavor is a little better, because the one I shot ended up shooting last year turned out to be 10 years old, and she tastes like she's 10 years old. She tastes fine. She's a little extra chewing involved.
Yeah. When I every year I try and shoot one with a bow, and the second that I shoot one, because this happened before, when I shoot the doe, I will grab my shit and I will get down on the tree and I'll walk away. I shot a doe one year that I thought didn't have fawns. She runs off, and you know what showed up?
Yeah,
the fawns. And
I'll tell you what, and not that this should change anyone's thoughts on this, because those experiences suck. They'll be fine biologically. But the interesting thing, to throw some actual like data on this. So some states have looked into the genetics of, they were looking at genetics probably for other reasons, right? But like deer that are captured together in January. So this is a little later season after the rut, but like deer that are captured together in January, a doe and a fawn captured together, are only mother and offspring about 50% of the time. So like there's so much mixing that happens through the fall that there's no guarantee that the fawn with a doe is actually that doe's fawn.
Uh-oh. Really?
Yeah. Like they'll just find, you shoot the doe, they'll find another deer and they'll go hang out, and other deer will accept them. And so like,
it's crazy to me, you got like a lot of these, I'm going to just call them deer farmers in the Midwest, right? They have bought these farms genetically located in places that produce phenomenal genetics, and most of it's about the doe, right? Yeah. They will shoot these doe that have, let's say, she's got a button horn with her. They will shoot these doe for the sole purpose that it'll keep that button horn more than likely on that farm or within a certain diameter, because he won't move off once.
Because his mom's not there. I mean, yeah. I mean, that is sort of like a doe will not tolerate her male fawns in her home range, right? Like, so there is that, but I mean, that's pretty tenuous in New England. Like, you're really gonna, there's so much mixing and stuff that happens that,
Yeah. So you're proposing, archery? Is it a doe only season, September 15th in certain zones?
Yeah. So it's a little extension of archery season. So starting September 15th up until October 1st, our regular archery season, in very specific, basically suburban areas, doe-only bow hunting. And the idea is, like, early season, people are itching to go bow hunting. These will be the only places open. So if you really want to go in these 2 weeks, find a spot in someone's backyard.
Yeah.
And I will say, like, the areas that, and there are maps on our website of the specific areas we're proposing. There are bigger chunks in there. It's not all like half-acre suburban lots, right? Like they're 10, 20-acre places. There's some little pieces of public land. Like you can find a place to hunt in these areas. But the hope is to focus some of our archery antlerless harvests in these places where we can't kill deer with guns. Whether it's legal or not, no one wants to hunt there with guns because you can see 3 houses everywhere you are, right? But there are a lot of deer. And it's a place where we're going to have a lot of conflicts with deer if we don't already. So we're just trying to kind of stay ahead of that a little.
Yeah, yeah. Because there's a lot of that, like I'm going to use Chittenden County, for example. There's a lot of that nuisance permit stuff taking place where guys are shooting. Landowner gets X amount of nuisance permits and he can give them to a guy or an individual to go in and shoot those deer. Now they can shoot them at all hours of the night, I gather.
Yeah, I mean, there's less of it than most people think, but there are a few... usually it's like vegetable farmers. Sometimes it's like orchardists, apple orchards can be deer can be a problem. But yeah, that we get a handful every year that, there's no actual permit process. There's the way our laws are in Vermont. But yeah, some of these farms are killing half a dozen deer. Up to 10 is the limit anyone can do. But yeah, I mean, these are deer that could be available for hunters, except there aren't really any hunting going on. There could be. I mean, it's legal to hunt in most of these areas, but people don't want to hunt there for the most part, right? There, and so that's part of allowing this is like we recognize every hunter is not going to have interest in this, but a handful of guys are willing to hunt kind of these suburban settings, especially with a bow. And if you're willing to kill deer there, great, man. We're going to give you that opportunity.
Yeah. Has the department thought about maybe making that statewide? Like starting September 15th?
Yeah, we did. But so, again, we're trying to focus our effort in these areas. And if we make it statewide, no one's going to go there. They're going to go where they regularly hunt, right? So that's the reason we're limiting it at this point. If this turns out to not amount to anything, then I think we'd look at just extending it statewide.
Yeah, from an outside perspective, my perspective of it, it would be awesome if we could hunt September 15th, kill a bunch of deer, kill a bunch of doe. I mean, maybe implement, killing bucks that time of year too. It's a great time of year to kind of get on to.
Yeah, I think we got. I mean, there's potential for more expansion in our hunting seasons, but I think we got to get through this set of changes first and see what effect it has.
Yeah,
I think that's our priority right now. Is like obviously killing does and rifles a like sea change for Vermont hunters. So like. For us, that's priority number 1 right now. Let's get that. Let's see what impact that has, because that's going to have trickle-down effects on other seasons. And then I think there's opportunities for, lengthening other seasons potentially.
Yeah.
It
definitely would be nice. Like some of the areas that I've, live in or focus on or whatever, it's way too populated with doe. Same thing. Like these cities, you can't get after them. They're protected, right?
Yeah.
You hear it all the time. Well, I'm not seeing deer in the big woods. Nobody should be killing that doe that's living at 3,000 feet. But the fact of the matter is she's a townie just like these are that live in town, and there's not enough habitat for everybody. So
yeah, it's a tough balance, right? And I tell people, like, if you don't think you see enough deer in your hunting area, especially like if you're getting back in the woods, if you're a hunter that likes to get back away from things and like you're not seeing a ton of deer there, well, just don't shoot a doe there, but shoot it in someone's backyard. Yeah. Like you don't have to doe hunt the same place you buck hunt.
Do your due diligence.
Yeah. I mean, I don't. I fill my doe tag at home in Rutland County, and then I come up here and buck hunt. Right. Yeah. I have no interest in buck hunting down there, and I have no interest in shooting does up here. They're separate things to me, and I wish more hunters would think of it that way. Like I'm going to go fill my doe tag somewhere, and then I'm going to go buck hunt somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah. So that being said, some of this is going to get opportunity out there, being able to shoot 2 buck. Yeah. Right. Tell me a little bit about the whole 2 buck thing.
So this comes from, I mean, we went to the 1 buck thing 5 years ago, starting in 2020. 1 buck across all seasons. Which has actually worked in terms of making our hunters more selective. we're absolutely seeing, in the places where that's the only thing we changed, where we kept our antler restriction, and the only thing we changed is we went to 1 buck, we're seeing a lot fewer yearlings shot in those areas. And those hunters are clearly like, all right, I only get one. I'm not shooting that 4-pointer. So it has helped, right? And so we want to keep that. But at the same time, probably the number one complaint I've had of the 1 buck limit is we get a lot of archery hunters, particularly, who are like, I don't bow hunt anymore. I'm not willing to give up rifle season. So if I saw a buck with a bow, I wouldn't shoot it. And the idea of like having to pass an 8-pointer is I don't even want to go out bow hunting because of that. So we get a lot of folks who might be willing to shoot a doe, but aren't even out in the woods because they don't have a buck tag, or don't feel like they have a buck tag. And so that's what we're trying to address with this, conditional second buck. You can shoot one with your bow if it's not a yearling, essentially. That's why we chose the 3 on a side.
3 points, 1 side.
Yeah, that basically eliminates all yearlings.
Yep.
Almost. So be a little selective on your first one, shoot a doe, and now you can get a second buck. It has to be in a separate season. So you can only get one, only one during archery season, only one during rifle season, one during muzzleloader. But it'll get those people back out bow hunting. Same with muzzleloader. We got a lot of folks. Our muzzleloader kill actually went down after the last set of changes when we went to 1 buck. Because, again, if people don't have a buck tag, they're a lot less incentivized to go out with their muzzleloader if all they have is a doe tag. One of our former deer biologists in the Northeast, so we all get together at least once a year. And I remember when we were proposing going to 1 buck, he's like, buck tags are what get hunters in the woods. Even hunters willing to shoot does, but if a buck tag is what gets them in the woods. And I now have to say there's some truth to that.
Yeah.
So that's what we're trying to address with this. It may seem a little convoluted to people. It seems a little complex on its face. It's really not, I think, once people really think about it and get into it. But we're trying to give people that opportunity if they're still willing to be selective, which maintains the value of the 1 buck limit, and they're willing to help us shoot by shooting antlerless deer. So that's what we're trying to do.
I think it's a great incentive. I mean, I'll put myself in those shoes and say that half the reason I don't bow hunt or don't bow hunt nearly as much as I used to is because of that same reason. Like, I want my buck tag in my back pocket when we get snow in this country.
Yeah.
Prime example, myself and Jamie took Cash, 4 years old, took him out bow hunting for the first time, and here's a forkhorn, right? Little 4-pointer, 6-pointer, whatever he is, 180+ pound buck. And he steps out and Cash is going, Dad, shoot him. And I'm like, and me being selfish the way that I guess I am, I chose not to shoot him when I should have taken that opportunity for that experience and shot that deer, right? Like, probably would have been a very special moment. And so I didn't because of my own selfishness.
Yeah, and I think I view it as we're giving opportunity to folks. Like, it's not, I don't think it's going to affect our harvest one way or another. I don't think we're going to, like, we can look at how many people would actually qualify for that currently. Like, how many people's first buck is big enough and they shoot a doe. And yes, I realize, like, with the incentive out there, more people will try to qualify for it, right? But, like, everyone who qualifies isn't actually going to try to kill the second buck also. But assuming that everyone who currently qualified tried to kill a second buck and they have normal success on that second buck, it'd be like 70 bucks a year statewide in Vermont. It's nothing. It's nothing.
Wow.
So it has no
That's
effect
less
on
than
our
one per town.
Yeah.
Really?
Oh, it's yeah.
Like a half
it's
a deer,
one
half
every
a
3
buck.
towns or something like that. Yeah. It's nothing. And what you gain on the front end by hunters being a little selective, it probably more than cancels that out.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's going to have any impact on our buck harvest other than maybe making hunters more selective, which isn't a bad thing.
Yep.
And again, even on the antlerless harvest side, like, maybe a small uptick in antlerless harvest, but it's not like we're going to suddenly kill 1,000 more antlerless deer because of this. It's going to be minimal, but it gives more opportunity. It gets people in the woods more. That's a good thing.
How is it going to work when the guy goes and shoots a kills his 6-pointer with his bow, and then he gets a doe permit. He has to apply for that, or
he'd have to. Well, I mean, he could shoot a doe with his bow, so he could buy another archery license and get a doe with a bow. Or you'd have to have an antlerless permit, lottery antlerless permit. So in some zones, those are going to be hard to come by.
That's
so there are some people who may not have really have the opportunity to do this.
Okay.
Right. It's not. I mean, anyone who bow hunts theoretically has the opportunity because you can shoot a doe with a bow anywhere.
Yep.
You better have these state employees maybe invest in Rust-Oleum to go around with orange spray paint, start putting X's on roadkill does.
Yeah, we're trying to figure out. I think we have ways we can. The whole like falsely reporting a doe that you didn't really, or like someone shoots a doe and like 6 people have reported as their doe. Like there are ways we can get around that. Like people are always going to cheat, right? But
Wisconsin, I went there one year driving down the interstate. Headed, and there's doe on the side of the road with a great big orange X on him. It was Ernebuck at the time.
Oh, and that was there. Yep.
So guys would just grab
anything and claim it was their doe.
State would go around, put orange X's on dead deer on the highway.
You need to have them turn their ovaries in like you do with the moose.
Yeah, some genetic evidence that. No, I mean there are some ways we're looking into like trying to avoid people, being able to cheat like that, and no doubt someone's going to try to do it.
Oh
right?
yeah,
but like. The other thing is, like, how common is it actually? And if a handful of people do it, like, whatever, good for you for the extra effort, right? Like,
right. You're busted. So
the wardens are incredibly good at enforcing, figuring that stuff out. The key again, like hunters need to pick up some slack here and report things. If they know, like, hey, this guy didn't actually shoot a doe or that didn't actually shoot that first buck, he's claiming he did. Let a warden know. Like they're good at investigating things if they know they need to investigate it. So there are ways we can figure that out. But I mean, it's to me this is little to no impact, and it's more opportunity for hunters. So I think it's a great thing. And I've heard from a lot of avid hunters that hunt multiple seasons think this is the greatest thing ever. And then a lot of guys who think like one buck was the greatest thing we ever did in the state of Vermont, and they don't like it, no matter what. It doesn't matter what the reasoning is. They just are opposed to the concept of anyone shooting a second buck.
I think when you put it in simpler terms, like you did, what this equates to statewide, it's nothing, right? The goal is to kill antlerless deer. It's not. The goal isn't to kill more buck.
No, and I would argue the goal is to specifically not kill more bucks if we can. Yeah.
Right. I do think that you and I need to talk about this after and eliminate shooting 2 bucks in this country, but that's a different story.
Well, that gets into the like, if you can only get 1 per season, like yes, here you get I guess the rifle and muzzleloader people, but like so few people bow hunt out here.
Yeah.
Again, not gonna have an impact. I don't think. I mean, before 5 years ago, when people could shoot 2 bucks out here, it didn't change anything.
No. But you saw the best of the best doing it. You know what I mean? Like you saw some of Vermont's premier hunters in this country, and you didn't want to be a buck track. I could tell you that. If you weighed 200 plus,
but
you were.
Those people now have to kill a doe, and a lot of those people never killed does.
Very true. Very true. Yep, you got that right. So, antlerless permits with during gun season.
Yeah, that's the one that's made me the most friends so far.
Mostly like 70 or 80-year-old guys that lived through the 70s.
Anyone who is old enough to have lived through and remember the 80s.
Yeah.
The 80s was the last time it was legal to shoot does during rifle season. It was literally illegal. The legislature banned it after that. We couldn't have done it if we wanted to until, I think, 2015. That ban went away. But, no, it was, so I think the history, and I think the history is really important here. It frustrates me because, like, I wasn't alive. So there was 79, 80, 81. There were a few years in the mid-'80s with, like, very modest antlerless harvest. But 79, 80, and 81, I'm sure, are the years that people remember as being, like, way over the top. I wasn't alive. So I'm kind of like, I'm not sure that should have any bearing on how we manage deer today. Right. That frustrates me a little. But the history is important. So the legislature controlled deer hunting forever. And then in 1978, the department got control of the deer herd, like setting season regulation, like each year. Like the department can now set how many permits are issued each year and how it's handled and all that. That was given in 78. I don't know, 78 or 79. 79 was the first year the department said, all right, here's what we want to do. And that year they issued a lot of antlerless permits. And then in 1980, it was like, and I showed this in my presentations in the public hearings, but it was like, I think it was 42,000 antlerless permits statewide. And the total antlerless kill that year was 15,700, 14,700 of them during rifle season by permit. For perspective, we issued just under 24,000 antlerless permits last year, which is a record in muzzleloader season. We're almost just over half of what was in the early 80s. And they killed 14,700 antlerless deer in rifle season. We killed a total of just under 8,000 antlerless deer last year across all seasons, 3,500 with permits. So like the scale is just off the charts compared to what we do today.
Right.
And I can't fathom doing that again.
Yeah.
But that's what people are afraid of, is that we're going to repeat that. And that had an incredible impact on the deer herd. There was also, there were a lot of deer at the time, but the winter of 82, I think 81, 82 is the hardest winter we have on record. So you had 3 years of super high antlerless harvest and then the hardest winter on record. And the deer herd tanked. It was sort of the department's intent. So they're kind of like, hey, this is what we meant to do. But of course, everyone is like, flip their shit, right? Like, how could you do this? And it did literally take almost a decade for deer numbers to get back to where they were in the late 70s. But, it was the early mid 90s before they got back there. So I understand why people are like, you can never do that again. And we don't want to do that again. We want to do nothing like that again. But that's why people are scared of it. And I get that. And also the other, aside from the impact to the deer population, the other concern people have is like the safety concern. Because they lived through the however many constant gunshots, bullets whizzing through the trees above them,
Sounded like the opening day of duck season on Mississippi.
Yeah, but again, we had twice as many hunters then as we do now. And we issued twice as many antlerless permits as we do now. It wouldn't be anything like that
You
today.
still have to identify your target.
Well, that's the other thing. People bring up, though, everyone's just going to be brown it's down, shooting anything they see. And half the state, we have an antler restriction. And it's actually the half of the state where we issue 75% of our antlerless permits because those are places where we have most of our deer, right? So most of our permits are in places where you can't shoot spike horns. So you still got to look. So there's no brown, it's down. And also, most hunters don't hunt like that. Mm-hmm. They're safe, ethical hunters. They identify their target. Everyone's had hunter safety today. Yeah. That was not the case in the early 80s. So it's just entirely different, world we're working in. But the most important thing, I think the best reference for this, literally every single other state allows antlerless deer to be shot during their rifle season.
Yeah.
We are the lone exception to that. And somehow everyone thinks we're going to be killing people left and right and we're going to wipe out our deer herd if we do it. But every other state does it without issue.
You got to love Vermonters. They're passionate about their whitetail hunting.
I agree that we're different. We're not that different, So, it's an interesting thing and people feel real strongly about it. But it's the people who are old enough to live through it, have that strong negative opinion. Younger hunters are overwhelmingly supportive.
Yeah. You see it, you hear it when you go to these meetings. Generally.
Yeah.
There's some disgruntled folks and their elders.
Yeah. And everyone has opinions, right? And that's fine. That's what we want to hear. And I will say, this is a proposal from us, and I wouldn't even guarantee at this point this one's going to pass. I don't know how our Fish and Wildlife Board has the power. And I'm not 100% convinced that all of them are on board with it because many of them did live through it, and they're hearing from their people their age, their buddies who are like, we can't repeat this again, and again, we're not going to repeat it, but
it's needed in certain parts of the state.
It's 100% needed, but also I think people have the misperception that like we're trying to reduce deer numbers everywhere with this. Like this is our like, we're gonna really tamp it down, and we're not. Like we still control the harvest by how many permits we issue. All we're changing here is when you can fill your permit, not the number we issue. The number we issue we adjust every year. If we allow people to fill them during rifle season, the success rate's going to be higher, obviously. So we'll issue fewer permits to kill the same number of deer. But that's in most of the state, that's what we're going to be doing. In some areas, like we were talking about, like Franklin County, yeah, we're gonna try to kill more deer. But certainly up in this part of the state, we meet our targets already. We're not going to kill more deer. We'll issue fewer permits and make that adjustment, and so we keep the same antlerless harvest we've been having.
So same kind of process. Guys will put in for antlerless doe permit.
Yep.
For X zone, and that's your
yep.
That's
you
your doe
you
permit.
get your permit. That's your doe permit. You can choose to fill it in the October muzzleloader season, the rifle season, or the December muzzleloader season. We're just giving you an extra season to fill that permit, but you still got to have that permit.
Has to be in that zone.
Has to be in the zone that permit is for.
Yep.
Yeah, and some zones like E, like we issued a few permits in E last year, coming off the easiest winter on record. We're almost certainly not going to propose any permits in E this year, or probably for the next several years, because we had a real winter again. So like E is not going to have any permits.
No doe permits at all in E.
Probably, at least for the next few years, unless
Thank
we
you.
string some mild winters together. So like, yeah, this is an irrelevant change for E, right? Like, yeah, great. You can fill your antlerless permit during rifle season, but you can't get an antlerless permit. So it's not a thing. And there'll be other parts of the state where we might issue 100 or a couple hundred. So like 1 in 10 hunters might have an antlerless permit.
I think it's a great thing. I really do. I do. I think it's a tool that is much needed to control what we're not controlling already, right?
Yeah, I mean that's what it's about. We need a new tool. I've likened it to like, it's essentially like making the switch to like, okay, we've been hunting with a shotgun. Now we bought a rifle. Now we can shoot further now, but we don't have to take further shots, longer shots.
Yep.
Right. It gives us the ability to do something we couldn't do before, but it doesn't mean we have to do that.
Right.
And so it's a new, better tool.
Yep. From a biologic standpoint, is it better to shoot that doe early season, or?
Long term, it makes no difference when you kill a doe. Every time you kill a doe, you're removing that doe and her future offspring. That's always the math, right? In the short term, like that winter, that year, that winter, the earlier you can get a doe off the landscape, the more food you're saving for the deer that are actually going to go into winter. But that only matters for that year. Once you get to the next year, it only matters whether that doe is gone or not.
Right. And also, I would assume that you're possibly saving some of those buck in doing so. If you're killing your doe early, you've got less stress on your buck running around all fall.
That doesn't really play out. I mean, bucks, it's the chasing that kills bucks, right? Like they're going to run themselves ragged no matter how many does there are, no matter what your sex ratio is, no matter like you can make the argument. A lot of people make this like, well, the buck he didn't have to waste his energy breeding a doe that's not going to survive. But if that doe's not there, then he's just going to waste his energy finding the next doe. So it doesn't. Bucks burn themselves out no matter what.
I guess, and maybe I should have said this. Are we better off to shoot those doe early season so that the doe that are on the landscape, the bucks are breeding at that peak time when we want them to breed, and does aren't missing their 28-day cycle, which in return would produce weaker fawns
later,
going in? Yeah.
So believe it or not, almost all of our does breed first estrus. Like we have one peak, and it's the like middle of it is right around the 20th of November. So like I don't know, I can't remember off my top of the head the exact percentage, but it's like 2/3 of your does somewhere around there breed 1 week either side of November 20th. So like
one week or the other.
Which this past season was basically all of our rifle season was that peak. And it's what a lot of hunters call the lockdown phase of the rut, right? Like there are so many does in estrus that a buck is just going from one estrus doe to another. So they're constantly tied down, hiding somewhere. But we don't see, like, they don't miss, basically. what you see in December and even trickling sometimes into January is younger or less healthy does that just came into estrus later. I'm not saying it never happens that they miss the first time, but like it's rare. So we really don't see that. So it's not what you would see or what you might see, I guess the benefit of getting rid of does earlier is you might see a little more pronounced rut activity, more bucks fighting over a smaller number of does.
Closer ratio.
Yeah, the more balanced sex ratio sort of thing. And then you're going to get more competition among your bucks. You're going to, see more bucks sign, grunting, calling, rattling, that sorts of things.
Right.
Maybe be more effective because bucks just they know they got to fight for the few does that are there, as opposed to the sex ratios we have. Whatever buck is available gets the doe because we're skewed.
What is that ratio? Do you figure right now?
We end up somewhere. It depends what part of Vermont you're in, but somewhere between 2 and 2.5, maybe a little over 2.5 does per buck, which most people probably think is low. They think it's maybe more skewed than that, but people got to remember, like, we're not counting fawns in that math. So there's a lot of other antlerless deer out there that aren't there. This is adult bucks to adult does. Yep. But yeah, I think statewide we average like 2.4 is where we're at right now.
And it gets skewed if you were to let's take two opposite ends of the spectrum from Essex County to Franklin County. There must be.
Yeah, believe it or not, Franklin's a little more skewed. That's where you get into like 2.6 probably, and Essex County's probably like 2 does per buck. But like Franklin County or WMU's B and A, which is the Champlain Islands, they actually kill more adult does than they kill bucks every year. So their harvest is very balanced in those zones. It's still not enough does, but they have a very balanced harvest. You go to some parts of like central and southern Vermont where we're killing 2 times as many bucks as we are does, that's where you start getting really skewed ratios, right? And it's actually almost impossible to get more than 3 to 1 in a natural population because your fawns are always 50-50, right?
Right.
So, but those are the ones that get more skewed, where you need to kill more. But up here, because winter kills as many as hunters do, we get pretty good balance.
Oh, Mother Nature usually takes care of it. Yep. Huh. Now, shooting mature does, shooting, let's say 1.5-year-old does. Theory behind it, or myth or whatever, I'd love to hear your explanation. Is it better to shoot an older doe that has fawns or a younger doe that has fawns, or vice versa, doesn't have fawns, right?
Yeah.
Older, more mature, bigger does would produce healthier fawns?
Generally speaking, yeah. Like a prime age doe. So what we see is our does from about 2 years old to 10 or 12, they're pretty much producing twins every year. So that's a long range of prime age. But in the middle there, somewhere in the like 4 to 8 is those are probably your really prime. They have the best habitat. They have the best home range, right? Like they've had a few years to settle into the best spot. They know where to hide their fawns. They know all the tricks. Those does are going to recruit your fawns more effectively. Young does, especially first-time breeders, their fawns have less of a chance of surviving. That said, if they're alive in the fall, their chance is about the same getting through winter. So it's really hard to gauge, like whether a doe is good at it or not. Old does, once they start, you get long white face, kill that doe. I don't care if she's still producing fawns. At a point, somewhere around 10 or 12, they'll still give birth every year, but they're probably not raising their fawns anymore. They're just not healthy enough.
Really?
Yeah, they're just, they're old ladies at that point. But they'll still give birth, and they're still out there eating a lot of food. They're not really mounting it, anything. And they'll be a big doe. And they might have fawns with them. And that's the tricky part in the fall is, they're like grandma. Fawns might be hanging around with her, but they're not necessarily hers. So those big old long-faced does, like, shoot them. Again, they're probably all hamburger, but shoot them. Otherwise, though, like, shooting a young doe is going to have less impact on your population. because she's not going to recruit fawns, at least for a few years. She wouldn't. So it's all pretty tricky really, when you're really trying to get into that.
Is there any information like age of the does that's being killed in the harvest?
Yeah, we age some does. I mean, mainly like our staff work check stations on youth weekend. So any does that come in there, we'll pull a tooth and age. I'm hoping we're going to start collecting some more data on does because we can get good doe age structure at a statewide level, or even some regions we get enough samples. But like, I couldn't tell you in any one WMU what the doe age structure is.
Yeah.
Maybe in B because we get a ton of deer from there. But like, I'd love to have that because that tells us a ton about like survival rates and how many should we be killing. And but our does are old.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're definitely older than they should be.
Some of them need to go. Load up the guns.
Yep.
That's interesting. Where would you say the structure of the buck herd is? The average structure, percentage-wise, of like say 1.5-year-old bucks to 4.5-year-old bucks. Are we killing many 4.5-year-old bucks?
We're doing a lot better than we're probably doing as well as we ever have in terms of killing 4.5-year-old bucks. In fact, I think this past year, I couldn't tell you what the percentage is off the top of my head. I think it's somewhere around 12 to 16% of our total buck harvest is 4+ statewide.
That's pretty good.
It varies a lot from zone to zone.
Yeah.
And not always like the way you'd think. Like there are a lot of zones. I mean, again, we'll pick on Franklin County. Like a lot of 8-pointers killed in Franklin County. A lot of them. Vast majority of them are 2 years old. Right. So they're killing a lot of deer that are decent deer, but they're 2 and 3. They're not getting into those older age classes because their hunting pressure is that high. You can go to other parts of maybe central or southern Vermont where our habitat's not great, and you're killing deer that look exactly the same. They're 170-pound, 180-pound 8-pointer, and they might be 4 or 6 years old, and they're just a standard. They're fine deer, but nothing special, and that's as good as they're ever going to get. So yeah, it's hard you can't gauge it by the quality of bucks you see in an area. The age is. There's a lot of variation, individual variation by age.
I've got so many questions pertaining to this. But I guess the biggest is how can you manage a deer herd statewide when you have so many different regions that it's almost like a different deer herd in the northwest corner to the northeast corner to the central spine of the Green Mountains to the southwest corner to the southeast corner, right? Like there's different diversity in habitat, number of deer on the landscape, body size between the two, antler size.
Yeah, you can't. And I fall into this trap all the time because, we try to simplify things for people and give them the one answer for the whole state. And it's any statewide number we ever throw. And again, I think I said this at the public hearings. Like if you ever hear us throw out a statewide number, it's meaningless. Because one part of Vermont is so different from another part of Vermont. I refuse to put out our statewide deer population estimate. It's an entirely meaningless number. Like it means nothing to me, so it clearly can't mean anything to anyone else. But it does piss people off, so I don't even put it out there. But no, you're right. You get like Essex County, you're talking like 6-7 deer per square mile on average. Again, like interior parts are like 1 to 2 deer per square mile.
Yeah.
Connecticut River Valley's maybe pushing 10. And then you move to other parts of Vermont and you're talking 20+ deer per square mile and entirely different habitat. And yeah, bigger deer up in the northern part of the state. The southern deer are smaller.
Just a different animal,
and
right?
And then you get different productivity from one area to the next. So like the same, and we can't, and that's why we manage at the wildlife management unit level. Like that, every wildlife management unit has its own population objectives, we set our management all for each one of those units is managed differently, essentially, because we have to. Some of them are similar and you can kind of group, but like sometimes the difference from one to the next one right next door is, here, the Northeast Kingdom is one of the most difficult regions to manage because you've got WMUE with very low deer numbers, totally controlled by winter, good summer habitat. winter range is your limiting factor. You go to the other side and you're in D1, which is all farmland, has 20 deer per square mile, but your access is entirely different. Your productivity of your does is entirely different. So like we need to,
Yeah.
And they're I drove from one to the next this morning.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. That's phenomenal deer country in that region over there, right? Like
It is.
big farms, there's cedar bottoms everywhere, ag land. They hunt them a lot like Canada in the sense that, it's box blinds, people aren't driving woods,
Right. Right.
But those deer are going farm to farm to farm, and typically the neighbor on the left passes the spike horn and the neighbor on the right does not.
Yeah, and that's the problem. Your hunting pressure is so different. Like that's part of it's not just how we manage deer, but like you're in managing your hunters. Like people are hunting differently, and there's so many more hunters there compared to what you'd see in E. Mm-hmm. And so you have to the same regulation in both places will do very different things.
Yeah.
Right. So it is tricky. And over there, bucks don't grow up now, especially since we got rid of the antler restriction over there.
Talk to me about that. D1, that was was that kind of like a test zone in a way? Just to see?
It was, yeah. So when we got rid of the antler restriction, D1 kind of fell into this conveniently, sort of, fell into a middle ground, right? So we have the areas where we got rid of our antler restriction 5 years ago, are largely like the spine of the Green Mountains and the Northeast Kingdom. Lower deer densities, lower hunter numbers, hunting pressure, not farmland, big woods. So deer get away from hunters on their own. They don't need a regulation like that. And for the most part, we got rid of the antler restriction and nothing changed. We're killing the same number of mature bucks. There are more spike horns being shot, but there's still plenty of deer getting to the older age classes. D1 kind of was in between. It had in between hunting pressure. It's, higher than the rest of the places we got rid of the antler restriction, but lower than all the places we kept it, like the Champlain Valley and parts of southern Vermont, Connecticut River Valley. And it's farmland, not big woods. But it was a place where we could collect enough data because there are enough deer killed during youth weekend, and we can run check stations there. And so we could collect enough data to make some really kind of important comparisons between seasons and things, and understand what was going on with some of our information around our antler restriction and how it was potentially affecting bucks, like genetic health, that sort of thing. So we really wanted D1 to let's see what we can get away with. Maybe the hunting pressure's low enough and maybe enough bucks survive and it'll be okay. And it turns out it wasn't.
Yeah.
I think what surprised me, I think the one thing that we kind of underestimated is how vulnerable deer are, bucks specifically, in farmland. Right? They're just
doe.
Even though the same number of hunters, if you take an area that is mostly forested, big blocks of forest, and another one that's a lot of farmland, the deer are just so much more vulnerable in farmland because obviously people can see and shoot them further away, right? I think that's what we underestimated, and we're just not seeing bucks live past basically 2 years old in D1 anymore.
So from those measurements, antler diameter, weight, did D1 kind of stay the same as in the past compared to some of these other zones where you're saving spike horns? I guess, has the antler diameter stayed the same in D1, weight stayed the same versus a unit, let's say like H, where we're protecting spike horns and the weight kind of came down a little bit, antler diameter came down a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, we were seeing the same pattern in D1. So it turns out a lot of what we were seeing, weights get a little funky. And I'm sure we can talk more about how weights are through the season. But a lot of what we were seeing are concerns about the antler restriction around antler beam diameter and antler size actually had something to do with us switching from measuring that during rifle season, which we did historically always. And then once the antler restriction was put in 2005, we switched over to youth weekend because they can shoot anything, right? And it turns out those samples aren't the same.
Why?
For whatever reason, like even now, and this is what we were able to tell in D1, a yearling, a spike horn, so ignoring any bias about what hunters are choosing to shoot, a spike horn shot during rifle season is bigger than a spike horn shot in D1 during youth season. It's the same unit, same year, but the antlers are bigger on the spike horn shot during rifle season. I don't know if that's because there's some that, rifle hunters just don't see and get away, or maybe they're letting those little short spikes pass, and so they're not shooting those, but youth hunters are. But there's a bias there. And so it looked like when we switched over to youth weekend, to measuring during youth weekend, it looked like beam diameters suddenly dropped. And it was just because we made that switch. It's not antler restriction related. It's just because we switched when we collected data. Now, we are seeing declines in antler size state, in a lot of the state because of health issues, but not because of our antler restriction.
Okay. Fair enough. So it doesn't have anything to do with saving, some people are saying, you're saving the spike horns, you're killing the wrong 1.5-year-old bucks.
No, and I'm not saying
yada.
that's like best practice. Like certainly it's not, but there's so much complexity to deer genetics. Like a spike horn is not necessarily an
Correct.
inferior deer.
Yeah.
There's so many other things involved in whether he grows spikes the first year or not. That doesn't.
Yep.
That's not.
It might put
that's
him
not an
behind
important factor.
Might put him behind the 8 ball when he's first year of antlers, but doesn't mean that he's
Right.
not going to.
Right, and like that's the thing. Like genetics are so complicated. Mm-hmm. But like he might have spikes, because his first winter as a fawn maybe it was a tough winter that year, and so he only grew spikes. If he'd had an easy winter and he grew up 4 or 6 points that first year, he still has the same genes. Mm-hmm. That deer has the same genes no matter what, right? So
there's been plenty of studies done.
The genetics are so complex.
Yeah,
that you can't skew them. It turns out, basically, unless you're like, if we were removing 99% of our yearlings and like only leaving spike horns and killing everything else, which we're not that perfect, maybe, even then it's a maybe.
Yep.
So yeah.
So would you ever consider going to 3 points on the side?
This has come up a lot now.
Maybe in certain zones, like
I think there are zones where it would definitely get us more mature bucks. Like Champlain Valley would be the kind of
like the
poster
islands.
child. The islands, even Franklin County, like you definitely would get more deer slightly older than we are getting with a 2-point antler restriction. There's a trade-off to it. Right. And it's a social regulation ultimately. And so this is where our hunter's willing to accept this trade-off. You're going to kill fewer bucks. You're never going to make up that difference, right? Every extra year you let them live, some of them are going to die of other things. So you're never going to kill the same number of bucks if you keep letting them get older. So our hunter's willing to accept, all right, we're going to kill 10 or 15% fewer total bucks, but there's going to be more, big, mature, more trophy bucks. If hunters want that trade-off, that's what it's about. It's ultimately it's a social thing. There's no like biological need to be doing that. But
it's strictly to shoot trophy bucks, right?
It's to shoot bigger bucks, yeah. And if that's what hunters want, then that would be the way to get there.
Most hunters love deer meat, so if they're not going to shoot that trophy buck, chances are they're going to shoot a doe.
I mean, again, if hunters are willing to make that trade and say, all right, we'll shoot a doe instead.
Yeah.
Again, that sort of thing is not up to me. That's up to hunters. And if that was the decision, if they were like, hey, if someone wants to propose, we're not going to propose it, at least not now. We don't see a biological need, but if the social interest is there, and I don't know if I'd say we'd support it, but we wouldn't oppose it because it's social and it would achieve that objective of more 3 or 4 year old bucks being shot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There'd be a lot more dominance on the
and you may get more rut activity, and you may see more of that in those areas.
Yeah, but
again, this is stuff like it's hard to really manipulate a deer herd. Like we think we have way more control than we actually do. Yeah, they largely do whatever they want is going to happen, and we kind of fiddle around the edges like we're in control of it, and we're not. really.
What would be some of those management areas that could possibly sustain 3 points per side, right? Like obviously the islands might be one.
I mean, where you're going to see the difference is the places where you're killing a lot of deer before they're reaching those older age classes now. And so, yeah, it's the Champlain Islands, so like Champlain Valley. So A, B, F1, F2. I think you'd see the biggest difference in those units because for the most part in those WMUs, we're killing deer at 2 years old, and very few make it past 2 years old. The few that do, I mean, there's some nice deer that come out of there when they actually make it to 4 years old or older. The rest of the state, I don't know if you'd see a lot of change, honestly. Yeah. A little, like certainly you'd gain a little, but 3 points on a side is not like you're still getting a lot of deer shot when they're 6-pointers or small 8-pointers, and that's 2 to 3 years old for most of our deer. So how many more are actually going to make it to 4?
You would really need 4 points per side.
And even and then there's a lot of deer that don't make 4 points on the side ever.
2-year-old bucks that are 8-pointers or
But then there's also and some folks have brought this up, and I've never hunted under a system where it was 3 points on a side, especially like how we hunt in big woods when you're walking through the woods and you get a moving deer and you're trying to see, does that thing have more than a fork? Is there a third point there? That's a whole lot different than just trying to see a fork. You can pick out a fork pretty easy, but is there 3, or are you seeing the first antler overlapping the one? That's a lot different. And so
it's pretty much got to be in a setting that's farm country.
I think it works best in a place where you can get a good look at it, open look at a deer. You're not trying to shoot moving deer, which that's it's a whole challenge in and of itself anyway. But I think in big woods you'd get a lot of deer that people would end up passing that were perfectly legal, and just because they couldn't actually figure out whether it had enough points on the antlers or not. I mean, I know I've shot at deer in Maine because I saw a beam. I have no idea how many points it had, but I saw a beam and that was enough. Well, it didn't matter because in Maine they don't have an antler restriction, but.
You've also killed bucks with racks that don't have much for points.
Exactly. You go to 4 on a side, and you could just get this giant 4-pointer or even 6-pointer. I mean, those are common, right? The big 6-pointers.
Yep.
Those are hard. That's hard to know in a lot of settings.
Yep. 100%. Weights of bucks, right? I don't have it in front of me. I think Vermont killed.
Oh, I do.
Do you? 79 bucks over 2?
Over 200 last year. Yeah, it was something like that last year.
Is that on par with what you'd expect, or
that's in line with where we've been recent years? We seem to fluctuate between somewhere around the 70s on the low end up to like 120. We kind of just wobble around in that range. I will say that 79 or 70 whatever it was number, that was deer that were checked in person with a scaled weight. So like there are obviously a lot of deer checked online now, especially archery season deer, and people might have weighed them at home, but I those weights I don't use those weights because I don't know if they had a valid scale or if they just made up that number. So there were a handful of other 200-pound deer during archery, and no doubt some of them were actual 200-pound deer that are not counted in that.
Yep.
So, that's a minimum number, I guess I would say.
Yep.
But yeah, it's pretty typical for us.
I think that's a pretty good number for Vermont. I often hear people, bitch and complain that, go to Maine to shoot 200-pound bucks, or go to New Hampshire, that, New Hampshire's better than Vermont. New Hampshire might shoot better antlers, right? Just a completely different deer structure, right? But what a lot of people don't understand is that the opportunity that we have to take a buck that weighs 200 pounds, some of these sistering states, New Hampshire and Maine, have far greater length of seasons during the time where bucks often weigh the most, right? Let's say New Hampshire starts September 15th. That's 15 days prior when bucks weigh significant amount, when they're a little bit more patternable compared to Vermont that starts October 1st. And same thing with...
Yeah, so bucks peak, we actually have interesting data because we collect so much age data. we have really good data on like buck weights through the fall, and buck weight peaks in late October, the end of October. I mean, it doesn't change a lot through the month of October. Once you hit November, it just slides, and it slides fast. I mean, mature bucks, it's nothing for a mature buck to lose 20 pounds in the month of November, and a 200 plus pound buck's probably losing more than that.
Yeah.
I mean, so yeah, you know, that buck that's 205 the first week in Maine, he's 180 something time our season comes around. You know, we shoot a lot of 180, 190 pound deer.
Yeah.
They'd have weighed 200 pounds if we were hunting the first week of November.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing, you know, Maine, New Hampshire, they've got 15 days plus on us with a gun.
Yep.
When those bucks weigh the most compared, you know.
Yeah.
I think Vermont.
We do pretty well. And I mean, the other thing is a lot of big bucks come out of the big woods, like the timber company lands. We have this one little corner of Vermont that has that type of habitat. And the rest of Vermont, we do get some 200 pound. I mean, we got a 200 pounder in almost every management unit in the state, right? But deer are definitely smaller in southern Vermont than they are in northeastern Vermont. And we have this tiny little corner of northeastern Vermont that is like big buck country. Like, if you look at like the percentage of our bucks that are over 200 pounds, it's like 5% in E, something like that. And it's like 1% or less in every other WMU. So it is different up in E, just a small number of total deer. There's so much more of that country in even northern New Hampshire. And then you extend that. I mean, it's half of the state of Maine is that type of country, right? So like they have just this much, much, much larger area that produces these big bucks than we do. Yep. And yeah, but also we're hunting them a lot later. So those same deer, exact same deer, just happen to weigh less when we kill them.
In theory, we potentially kill way more 200-pound bucks. If
you could somehow correct for all of that, we would probably on a like per square mile basis, we're every bit as good as New Hampshire and Maine. Yeah. I mean, there are parts of northern Maine,
that those
where
deer,
most bucks are 200 plus pounds, where that's just it's just different, right?
Survive the winter.
Yeah. But yeah, I think we actually do pretty well.
I would say so too. Yeah. Yep. Got any questions, Brent?
What about the feeding deer during the winters in the north?
Yeah, that topic comes up a lot. Obviously, again, you know, picking on our neighboring states, New Hampshire and Maine both allow winter feeding. We used to until 2005. We banned it because of disease concerns, and we would never consider it again because of disease concerns. And you know, there are a lot of politics when it comes to feeding and baiting, which are essentially the same thing. Just one is killing them over the food, and one is
and I'm more for the winter to get them
which
through
is the feeding
winter
sort of thing.
Yeah,
but the actual benefits of it are not nearly what people think they are. Unfortunately, we've reached a point in most of northern New England, and I mean it's sort of true even here in northeastern Vermont, but our deer yards, all the historic like big deer yards, are basically gone. They've either fallen apart or been logged or whatever. And so, you know, in places that still feed, like New Hampshire and Maine, if they stopped feeding, their deer herds would crash because they're dependent on the feeding at this point.
Yeah.
Right. But if they had good deer yards, that's not necessary. You wouldn't see that. The benefit is not what people like. If we started feeding now, we wouldn't suddenly have more deer. The benefit is not what most people think it is. It just doesn't. Deer have evolved. Our deer have evolved to get through winters, and I'm not going to suggest feeding doesn't help nutritionally, but there are other problems that come with it. It increases predation. It increases roadkill. Your fawns often die at a higher rate around feed grounds because they're the last ones that get access to the food. So at the end of the day, you don't really gain as much as most people would think. So the risks far outweigh any potential benefits in our mind. And again, like, I'm not going to discuss politics of other states, but I think if it was an entirely biological decision, they would not allow feeding in pretty much anywhere.
Huh.
I've got to imagine that it also plays a significant role in the health of these animals long term, right? You're keeping the weaker gened animal alive, where typically Mother Nature would take its course. Nobody wants to see something suffer, right? Like,
Right.
I'm the last person that wants to see a deer suffer, right? If I thought a deer was struggling, I'd probably feed the thing, right? Like all.
Oh,
of
I
these
understand
people,
why people want to do it. I
all these people
absolutely
that do.
get that. Yeah.
But that's where Mother Nature takes control and produces only the strongest and the healthiest animals to sustain what's going to come next, right? She's going to give birth, and she needs those fawns to.
Yeah, and you
live
do.
on.
I mean, I'm sure it affects your selection now is different, right? Like whatever selective pressures there used to be for the biggest deer, because you had to be big to get through winter. Now it's whoever's the bossiest one at the food trough, which is not it's not necessarily the same. Like that doesn't help her survive otherwise.
It's usually the mature doe.
Yeah,
She
and that's
might
why
have-
fawns often suffer at feed sites, and because they're the bottom of the totem pole, and so they don't always get, unless their mother is there or some doe is there to give them access to the food. They often don't, and there's no natural food around a feed site because deer continue to eat other things and they eat everything else. So they become problematic areas, and one of the other things that has changed a lot, and maybe is where we run into the like if feed sites in New Hampshire and Maine like stopped, it would be a problem. And we've seen this in northeastern Vermont. Like our landscape has changed. Like coyotes are here now, and 30 years ago in the early 90s, or the 80s, they were pretty rare, right? Like I remember when I was a kid doing dead deer searches in the Nullhegan, and you find an intact deer carcass at the end of winter because there wasn't anything to eat it. Now you don't find, you might find a leg bone here or there.
Pile of hair.
Yeah.
And so that, having that predator in the system changes what a functional deer yard is, right? What used to work with no coyotes doesn't necessarily work with coyotes on the landscape. And one of the best ways deer avoid coyotes is to go near people, because coyotes don't like being near people. So that's also often where they get fed. And so there's been this evolution, and I don't pretend to know like what's right or what's best or whatever, but I think that's what we've seen up here. That's why the Nullhegan yard doesn't get used anymore. It's why the Victory yard doesn't really get used anymore. I think those deer there are other places where they survive better, probably because in part of coyotes and also competition with moose, and like things have changed that I don't think we fully understand, but deer figure it out. And our deer are doing fine. Like, we don't need,
Do you think over time, if more deer inhabit this landscape, that they will move back into some of those older yards that they used to be in? They're not.
I think
inhabiting
in
now?
theory, in here in Essex County, if we end up with more deer, it's probably going to be because our winters get easier.
Yep.
And then, some of those yards that a deer might not get through most winters now, they might be able to make do in, right? And so maybe you'll see more deer used in Nullhegan. There's less snow. They can avoid coyotes easier, whatever the reason is. But I think we will start to see that shift over time. But right now, I mean, they seem to do okay. I mean, obviously they're not doing fantastic, but they seem to do okay wherever they winter over by the Connecticut River, which, as you know, there's less snow over there.
Yeah. It seems like these deer are divided, right? You'll have deer from the top of Vermont come 15 miles to yard along the river, and then you'll have deer that are midway that go the opposite way. They're going north to Canada.
Yeah, it's I don't understand, and I was always taught growing up, and maybe it was wrong at the time, but deer migrate. It's all based on like watersheds and stuff. They follow drainages, and they end up in the deer yard, which are usually lower elevation along a major river or something. And what we see here, and I know that Maine had collared deer for the last, I don't even know how many years, but for a while now, looking at their migration routes and how they travel to yards or feed sites, but they just take a beeline and they'll go up and over a mountain and across the river. There's no like landscape feature they follow. They just take a straight line from A to B. Don't care what's in the way. And it doesn't seem to make sense. And
No.
Like you said, they'll crisscross. It's not like there's a hard line where all these deer go that way and all the other ones go this way. They just I don't know if it's where they learned as a fawn to go, and so maybe they have a new place as an adult, but they go back.
You could be in Parmigiani and it looks like a crisscross effect, right? Some of them are going to Quasic and some of them are going to Pittsburgh.
Right.
They're just, there's no rhyme or
picking
reason.
a yard and however they go up to their summer range, but they'll go back to whatever yard they know, and it's it's a weird. But like I said, they know what they're doing, but we're best to just let them figure it out.
Do we have any collared deer?
We don't have any collared deer, mainly because I haven't come up with a good excuse to justify spending that kind of money yet. But no, there's just not a lot. We get a lot of data from harvested deer, so it's hard to justify like spending the kind of money it takes to collar animals. Like what piece of information would we really need? There's a lot of things I think would be interesting, and I'd love to put some collars on deer. And, if we were in a big state with a lot of money, I could probably make that argument, but I'm fighting with other people who have more pressing needs. So.
Yeah.
It's pretty neat to see some of that.
Those reports are unbelievable.
Yeah, and we're kind of, being a small state, we often have to suffer with just like, okay, all these other states are doing cool things. We'll just steal from them, like borrow whatever they find.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd love to do some out here. Like I would love to know where are our deer moving to yard, right? Like I don't pretend to understand all those details.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a big thing going forward is, how are we going to save these deer yards that are left? Man has inflicted some issues, especially revolving around logging. How can you tell a landowner what to do with his land and not do with his land? He is ultimately paying taxes on it. Or how do you tell a timber company you can't go cut your ground, right?
Right.
There's got to be, some sort of stipulations. I feel as though, or I don't know.
It's tough. I mean, we have some protections in Vermont on deer yards, but the other reality is like it's a little different in the northern areas where you get the big yards and they tend to be the same area for a few decades anyway, if not longer. But like a lot of areas, it's a little pocket yard, and while the habitat's right, the deer use it, but then the habitat changes and then those deer find another place to go. And that's why we really struggle to we can't keep our mapping updated because it changes too much. And how do you, again, landowner rights matter. So how do you say to a landowner, like, well, your land didn't used to be deer yard, but now it is.
Right.
Now there's these restrictions on it that didn't exist when you bought it.
And I want you to keep paying full taxes on it.
Yeah.
So.
That's hard to do, right? So it's hard. It is hard to protect habitat that's mostly on private land.
I see it. I see it in Stowe, especially around me, right? We got one place that probably houses about 30, 40 deer a winter, and they're proposing to put seven lots into it, right smack dab in the middle of it, and that's going to affect it. And then we've got another area in town. It was one of the largest deer yards in Lamoille County. You couldn't even snowshoe in there. You couldn't even winter bike in there, let alone put a snowmobile trail in there. This was back when John Buck used to be.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden they're proposing to put 24 houses in there, right? And it's.
Yeah. Again, theoretically, we're supposed to be able to protect those areas, but at the end of the day, what really happens is development always wins.
Yeah.
And
you've got pockets.
We try to mitigate as best we can, but it never goes back the other way. Yep. We're always losing ground, and we just try to do the best we can, and hopefully we lose it in the right places. But that's the challenge we're up against. We're always losing,
and you can't know what you're not told either, right? And I guess this is for some of the listeners that if you see something taking place in your area, you kind of need to let people know about it before it actually happens, because once it happens, it's gone, right?
Yeah.
And it's only going to suffer.
Don't assume that we know what's going on. I mean, we often do, but we don't always. And it's definitely helpful to, hear from folks.
Yep. What else we got for proposed regs that we haven't touched upon?
I think we hit the main ones. The other ones are kind of what I consider minor tweaks, like moving youth weekend back to the weekend before rifle, turns out moving it earlier, we got less participation because
Too much sports?
yeah,
Or
fall sports are all still going on, all fall activities in late October, and turns out that early November time is between like fall and winter activities. So
yeah.
yeah, we want to get better participation. We're going to move it back.
Have you ever thought maybe rather than do like a weekend, it was a week?
We actually a couple people have suggested this at meetings in the last couple of years. So there is value to going to meetings, folks. Like
go to your meetings.
Show up, make a suggestion. Eventually, it might happen. But no, a couple of people said, yeah, like why not extend it a little bit if you want to increase participation? And I think that's a decent idea. I don't know if we'd go a week, but like the idea of adding at least a Friday to it or something. And a couple folks have brought up, I think even a couple of our wardens were like, why not just give them 2 weekends?
Yep.
Again, like all stuff that sounds good, but I think we're doing a lot right now. And so we're trying to get through this. And then, we'll look at the next round. We might be like, hey, yeah, why not extend the youth weekend? Why not?
Yeah.
However, we might look at that. But yeah, I that has come up, and I don't know that we're opposed to it, but we also don't know the level of impact, right? There's only we're trying to limit how many things we do at once, and so we have some sense of some boundaries on what impact we might have at least.
There's a state that we often hunt that I think does it right, and they hold it before all our other seasons start, just because those deer are super patternable, predictable, and it's warm, and those little guys can participate in it, and
they see a lot of deer.
Yeah, whether it's good or bad, they shoot some absolute slammers. That's when they shoot probably some of their biggest bucks, right?
No
There'll be
doubt.
some pissed off people that don't get the opportunity to hunt it, but it definitely ignites that fire for those kids, and it might give them a little bit more time if we held it early to hunt up through the fall that same year.
Well, and that's what we thought 5 years ago when we moved it 2 weeks earlier. It was in part to keep it ahead of the new October muzzleloader season. So we moved it so it was before that. So it was youth still had the first chance with a gun at least. And we said, well, that matters. And then the earlier timing, the weather should be a little nicer. Maybe they'll spend more time. We'll get a little more participation. But none of that played out. It just the conflicts. This. And there's so much with hunting now anyway, and we saw this wicked during the pandemic where when people have nothing else to do, they hunt.
Yeah.
But when they have other things going on, hunting is not the priority for most of our hunters.
Mm-hmm.
And so it goes to the back burner. And so, if kids have other fall activities going on, that's what's taking precedent. And what we've seen mostly with Youth Weekend is people are still hunting, but they get one morning or one evening to hunt. And then they got a soccer game the next day or whatever. And so that's it. So they're not being able to hunt as much as we'd like them to hunt.
Yeah.
So
maybe that's where that couple weekends would work, or
more
days.
flexibility.
You give them a little bit of a window there.
Yep. Yeah. Again, that's where I don't think on its face, I'm not opposed to that idea. I think there's value to it. But.
Let me ask you something because of, I guess, that conversation. Would you guys ever consider maybe lengthening that gun season, to let's say start November 1st and trickle through and maybe move muzzleloader back to the last week, the first weekend of December or the end of November, kind of like how Maine does it per se, or New Hampshire?
Yes. Again, all things that, I think have come up. And in fact, I'm pretty sure we have a petition that was recently thrown out to the board with the December muzzleloader season I think it was to start it the Monday after rifle season. So it's just continuous,
rather than having a week break.
Right. Which, again, in concept, not opposed to. It wasn't part of our current package of stuff because, again, we're trying to get through what we're trying to get through, focus on that. And then after that, and the dust settles and we know how that all worked, then I think there is potential there to offer that. And extending seasons often doesn't increase your kill. It often just spreads it out. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it would have a huge impact on anything, but again, more opportunity. So I think there's a lot of potential for this stuff in the future. But it's just not where we are right now. But I think yeah, I'm not opposed to any of it. I think more hunting opportunities, all good in my book.
I had Lewis Porter on the podcast here a while back, and he said something that I wasn't quite in agreement with him, but he definitely is onto something, and I agree with him now. And he said that the best deer hunting, I think, is yet to come, and I would agree with that. I think that, you know, the direction that this state is headed, it has improved a lot in the last 5 years.
I hope so. I mean, I hope that's true, right? That we're headed in the right direction. We're trying to head in the right direction. I think there are some changes that need to happen. And you know, again, every part of Vermont is not the same. I have no doubt that some people who are like, it's as bad as I've ever seen in my 20 years of hunting. In your hunting spot, it probably is. But that is not the entire state of Vermont, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, based on hard numbers, the actual data we have on like the number of mature bucks we're killing, the number of bucks total we're killing, all that sort of stuff, like we're doing pretty well right now, and we're certainly headed in what I would argue is the right direction. So
there's a lot of opportunity out there, whether you're a guy that's just a meat hunter that wants meat, or if you're someone that wants a trophy-size animal. There's
an opportunity.
There is. I mean, you may not find it out your back door, but you can find it. You just got to look for it.
Yep.
You know. Well, enough about this. Tell me a buck story. You killed you killed a big one in Maine here. What, 2 years ago?
It's been a couple of years. Yeah, I think I actually. Yeah, no, I have a 2-year drought now. So it was 3 years. Well, yeah, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. I don't know. It's been a while. Yeah, I had a good stretch for me. I went 3 years in a row killing a buck. But yeah, I got a nice. The only buck I have on my wall, I'll say that's a
nice
good
one.
Yeah, and I don't put every deer on the wall. I'm a picky son of a bitch when it comes to that. No, this is probably the nicest buck I might ever kill. But big buck, we had him on camera. At a signpost that we put a camera on every year. We've had him for a couple of years and say, all right, this is sort of the target buck. We didn't have snow. So we're, bare ground hunting, like, all right, we're going to try where I think his bedroom is, sort of thing, like where we thought he hung out a lot. We targeted a few places, and I can't even remember how many days we'd been up there, but my brother and I, there's a place down low along the river, kind of river bottom stuff, and it's a little, there's nice spots, pockets of woods where you can kind of see a little bit, and then you get into thick stuff, and so it's highly variable. But deer love to hang out in that stuff, and it's one of the places we knew this buck hung out, and so I dropped down along the river. My brother went down below me. We're kind of going to hunt toward each other, and yeah, I got down in there just as I got down in the flat along the river, and it was a nice, wet, rainy day, so dead silent, which is great, except, of course, you can't hear the deer go either. But it kept me quiet, which is probably the only reason I got this close to this deer. But I'm walking down to the river and, looking around and kind of glancing, and I'm like, man, I think that rock had a tail. And I looked back. It's just the V of the tail. The deer was bedded. I was like 30 yards from him. I don't know. He had to be sleeping. I don't know how. It was pretty open. I don't know how he let me get that close. But, again, I was quiet, but he should have probably seen me before then. And I look back, and as I look back, of course, he saw me at the same time. And so he's getting up, and I'm fumbling to get my gun up. And I swung and shot. I saw antlers immediately when I looked back. He had quite a rack. And I swung and shot, and I swear to God I hit a tree. Because, you just swing quick, and you're like right on a clump of fir trees. And I'm like, God damn it. And I'm waiting for him to come around out somewhere, and there's no deer. He just disappeared. And I'm like, what the hell? I know I killed that tree because I was dead on it when I shot. And nothing. That was it. I'm like, shit. Can't believe I missed that freaking deer. And so then I'm like, all right, I got to look. And I start looking. I move a little bit back so I can see around the tree, and I see a leg kick up on the ground. And I'm like, I had to scare him. There's no way to hit him. But I'm like, and I walk over there, and he's flopping on the ground. I mean, it's a perfect shot. I hit him, and somehow I still haven't figured out whether I snuck it between two trees that were like an inch apart, or whether I got in front of, just missed the tree slightly. But somehow I missed the tree and hit the deer. But no, he was. I'd finish him off, but he was right there, and he was our target buck. And I was so so excited. My brother said, come on the radio, and like I basically was like, I got him. I didn't have to say what he knew what deer it was.
That's awesome.
And he was like, oh yeah, your voice was freaking trembling. You were clearly so excited. But
that's cool.
Yeah, it was cool. It was
a really nice buck.
It was a nice buck. He's a 9. He got a little kicker, so he's a 9-pointer, but he scores close to 150.
Yeah.
As basically an 8-pointer.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, he's big.
He was over too?
199.4.
That's what it was. Yes. Yes.
He
Should
was
have left the nutbag on.
I've never shot a 200-pound deer. I have 299-pound bucks.
No kidding.
Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah. But yeah.
Huh.
And again, that was probably the 20th of November, somewhere around there.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, if I
He
shot him a
drops.
day before, he's 200 pounds.
Yep.
If I shot him the first week, he's 220.
Yep. Yep. That's a pretty good buck. Just
He
regardless.
was a monster one. And the fact that we had him on camera, like I got some fantastic video of him like marking a signpost, and it's cool to have that and have the deer.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So I don't remember how long ago this was. I'm sitting in a deer meeting and Lake Region. I think it was Lake Region.
Yeah, probably.
And Nick's doing the presentation. And in the background of the presentation, there's this velvet buck, right? Big, wide, probably 22-inch, at least I would say wide, right? And he's got noticeable split twos. They just want to split a little bit, right? And he's a mainframe 5x5. And I'm looking at it, and I'm sitting next to Jared Judd, and I was like, I'm pretty sure I've got photos of that buck. Right? And through the whole entire meeting, I'm thinking, is that the same deer as, the one I'm targeting? Right? And at the end of the meeting, I'm like, raise my hand. I'm like, is that buck still alive, or is that buck up here? And he's like, zip. Shouldn't have put that on the screen.
Yeah, I only put Maine bucks on my back. Yeah. No, that one. Someone did end up shooting that deer.
Yeah, but he was never recovered. Well,
they recovered it, but it was scavenged. Yeah, they found it, like shot it in rifle and found it in muzzleloader sort of thing.
I remember seeing that photo, but that was like years later, even, wasn't it? Like
it was a couple years later, and he was smaller.
Yep.
He had lost at least one of the forks.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was his peak. I think was the pictures I had.
That was a nice buck. That was a really good buck.
Yeah, I got another one that I've been targeting a couple years here in Vermont that I don't know if he made this winter. I mean, he was at least 6 or 7 this year, so he's getting over the hill. Yeah, but he's wide. Probably similar genetics. But
no kidding.
Yeah, he's one I'd love to. But like this year, I don't know that I ever found his track this winter, and I hunted that area. I don't know how many days, and I don't think he's a 200-pound deer. Maybe at any point. I think he's 190 early season. So his tracks, I've tracked some bucks that may have been him that I thought were smaller, deer. But I go in there and I can't ever. I'm like, I know where you live, and I can't find your track even in the right conditions.
It's amazing how difficult it is to find those mature bucks when the season rolls around in this country, right? Like, people often don't grasp the concept of it until they come up here to hunt, and just it amazes them that they cannot catch up to a buck if, for one, they cut his track, and for two, half the time they can't cut a mature buck track. But yet, let's say summer, fall, they've got photos of this buck, right? Prime example, I had one, the deer is dead now, died of natural causes. No one ever killed him. He looked like he was a 240-plus pound buck. Beefy, right? 140-inch plus 10-pointer mass. A guy actually found his antler moose hunting this year. The deer has been dead 2-3 years plus now, but that deer, you would swear you could find his hoof print if you had snow. He was nowhere to be found. Yeah. And there was a handful of us, very good hunters, that covered a lot of ground that could not pick that deer's track up. Yeah. And that deer died of old age.
Yeah.
And it's a heavily hunted area. Right?
I don't know how they do it. I mean, and I think this past fall, a lot of hunters experienced that broadly across our entire rifle season. Like, it was hard to find any big bucks, even though we know they exist. I mean, we had more nice, mature bucks on camera in Maine where we hunt than I think maybe any year since we've started hunting there. And I don't think I tracked a deer that was over 170.
Yeah.
Like, I could not find a big buck track to save my life. And I know they're there.
Yeah.
No one killed them. They're all there. We'll get them on camera this fall, but they disappeared for 2 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty cool. It's pretty neat. I mean, there's definitely a lot of, there's some trophy buck in Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine right now. I mean, some people are going to think, well, some of them died during the winter. I don't really think the winter was
This was not a hard winter. I mean, the main thing for deer with winters is how long they're in a yard. And this was hard for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
But it was pretty easy through January. And this is still an early spring.
Yeah.
We forgot to remember that, like, deep snow into April is not uncommon in this part of the world. And we do not have that this year. So it was not a hard winter.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. There's going to be some buck on the landscape, I think, this coming year. There's going to be some real good ones.
There were a lot of, at least what we see in our age structure, there are a lot of like 3-year-olds out there last year.
Yeah.
So, you know, they're not quite there yet, but they're going to be nice. And if they made it through the winter, there should be a big slug of kind of those younger prime age bucks.
Yeah.
So
It's going to be a good fall.
hopefully.
It is. Well, Nick, thank you for doing this. Greatly appreciated it. It was,
My pleasure, man.
it was a good time. And when you kill that big buck this fall, you're going to have to come back on and talk to us about it.
Yeah, I'll give you a fuller story, hopefully. Yeah.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks guys.
Nick.
No one can save you. You better